international relations. Yesterday, we completed a very interesting chapter, that is India's relations with Pakistan. Today, we shall take up the next module and we are going to study India's relations with Afghanistan. Afghanistan happens to be a very important neighbor of India, located in the neighborhood of India. The country has gone through a lot of turmoil and conflict, and it also occupies a key location in the region. So, because of all these factors, Afghanistan becomes very important in Indian foreign policy. So today, we shall discuss India Afghan relations. We shall mainly focus on the Afghan conflict of the last few decades and understand how it has impacted India. Today, we'll also cover two important regional organizations because even that is an important part of the syllabus. We are going to study SARC and BIMSTEC. So these are the topics we have lined up for today. Let's begin with Afghanistan and let's take a look at where Afghanistan is located. Let's take a look at the map and understand some geopolitics related to Afghanistan. Now, if you look at this map, the first thing you can identify, right? There is something that really strikes you. With regard to the geography of Afghanistan, there is one feature which really stands out. Can someone tell me in the comments what could be that geographical feature? What is the first observation you make by looking at this map? Very good. Many of you are saying it's a landlocked country. Very good. Meaning it is surrounded by land on all the sides. It is surrounded by other countries. So Afghanistan has no direct access to the sea. So as a result, its growth opportunities are very limited. It has to depend heavily on the neighboring countries for sea access. The second point would be the neighbors of Afghanistan. So please identify the neighboring countries. This is very important for your prelims because map-based questions can be asked. If you remember, we are doing this for almost all the major countries in the previous classes as well. So Afghanistan is surrounded by Pakistan over here. To the east, you have Pakistan. To its west, you have Iran. And to the north, you have three Central Asian countries: Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. All right, these are the neighbors of Afghanistan. But however, you'll be surprised to know that India and Afghanistan are also technically neighbors of each other. We do share a border with Afghanistan. See, this here is the Gilgit-Baltistan region. You can see the line of control over here. This is essentially POK, Pakistan Occupied Kashmir. You can see Aksai Chin and the Chinese occupied territory. Right? This is the line of actual control with China. This is Aksai Chin here, which China has illegally occupied from India. Right? This here is LOC. So, since Pakistan and China have occupied these territories, the map does look different. But if we claim the whole state of Jammu and Kashmir, as we discussed yesterday, right? If you look at how the state existed in 1947 before the Pakistani occupation, and if that whole state would belong to India as claimed by India, then technically we would share a small border over here with Afghanistan. Around 96 to 100 kilometers. That would be the length of this border in Gilgit-Baltistan, where India was supposed to have this direct border with Afghanistan. This border would connect with this narrow land corridor of Afghanistan, which is nothing but the Wakhan corridor. This is the Wakhan corridor in the Hindu Kush region of Afghanistan over here. This narrow land area is the Wakhan corridor. So, without the Pakistani occupation, if you look at India's territorial claims in Kashmir, we would have shared this small boundary with Wakhan corridor and we could have directly connected with Afghanistan. So since we claim the whole of Kashmir, right? So technically it would be right to say that India is a neighbor of Afghanistan. That's why if you look at the official maps, which shows the entire state like this to be a part of India, right? And if you look at even government documents, if you look at India Yearbook, for example, in all these official documents, we say that Afghanistan is a neighbor of India. We mention that we share a 96-kilometer border with Afghanistan, right? Even though it doesn't exist on the ground, even though Pakistan has occupied these territories, it is important to insist this point because that is how you reiterate your claim. That is how we can substantiate our claim and ensure that we counter Pakistan and its illegal occupation. So technically and legally as well, India does share a border with Afghanistan, even though it does not exist in reality on the ground. All right. So these are the important points that you can observe from here. Now, please note that Afghanistan is also blessed with plenty of resources. It has hydropower potential and it has several important minerals that are present. Now, if you look at its demography, if you look at its human geography, in the southern and eastern parts of Afghanistan, especially in this belt, across this entire belt over here, you find a native community, a native ethnic group called the Pashtuns. The Pashtuns are very dominant in the southern and eastern parts of Afghanistan. Traditionally, this has been the stronghold of the Pashtuns. Pashtuns are also found in Pakistan as well, across the Durand Line. This would be the Durand Line, the Af-Pak border, the Afghanistan-Pakistan border would be your Durand Line. So across the Durand Line in Pakistan as well, you can find the Pashtun community. So the Pashtuns are a very dominant ethnic group. They are the most dominant ethnic group in Afghanistan, and they have been involved in several conflicts, rivalries since historical times. There are several Pashtun warlords who control few criminal activities in this region. For example, opium production, which is drug production. Several Pashtun leaders, they have their own militias, their own armed outfits, and historically they have been used to wars and conflicts and rivalries with outsiders and other ethnic groups. They control most of the resources in the southern and eastern parts of Afghanistan, and they have been the most dominant community. On the other hand, in the northern parts of Afghanistan, towards the Hindu Kush mountains, in this area, right, towards the northern parts of Afghanistan, you find various tribes, mostly Central Asian tribes, to inhabit this region, such as the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, Kazakhs, the Turks, and few other Central Asian tribes and the tribes from and the ethnic groups from across this region. They are found here in the northern parts of Afghanistan. And there has been a historical rivalry between the Pashtuns of the south and the various tribes of the north. Is that clear? Please understand this. Inside Afghanistan, there is a divide between the north and the south. Various collective tribes in the north, right, they do have a rivalry, a historical rivalry with the Pashtuns from the south. Now, this is relevant in today's geopolitics. I'll explain that later. I'll come to that point later. So if you're able to understand these basic geographical aspects of Afghanistan, it will become much more easier for me to explain the next part of my discussion. All right. Now, so based on this, let's start talking about the geopolitics of Afghanistan and let's look at the history as well. Because as we know, international relations is all about geography, history, right, and the development surrounding it. Afghanistan has become infamous as the graveyard of empires. Many experts, they often call Afghanistan the graveyard of empires, meaning this is a place where empires come to die. This is a place where major powers, global powers come to get defeated. Have you heard of this reference? Yes or no? Have you heard of the statement that Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires? Good. Very good. Some of you have heard about it. In the past, if you look at the history of Afghanistan, there have been many outsiders who have tried to capture Afghanistan and dominate Afghanistan. But each and every time, outsiders have been defeated. Even major powers and empires have been defeated because the Afghans are battle hardened. The Afghans are battle hardened, meaning they have fought many wars and battles, especially the Pashtuns, right? The Pashtuns and even the northern tribes. They have a history of conflict. They have a history of facing outsiders and protecting their land and resources from outside exploitation. So this century-old rivalries, battles, and conflicts has made the communities here to be very resilient. They withstand any outside invasions and occupation. So many major empires, the dominant global powers have come here trying to occupy the land, trying to control the land, but they've all been defeated and thrown out by the natives. The first empire to hit the graveyard were the British. You would have read about Anglo-Afghan wars in history, right? The British tried occupying Afghanistan to expand their British India colony, right? They defeated Afghans initially, but later, by the third Anglo-Afghan war, they were kicked out by the Afghans. It was mainly the Pashtuns who threw them out, right? This was in the 1800s. Then came your Soviets. In 1979, the Soviet Union would invade Afghanistan and it would deploy troops in Afghanistan for a decade until 1989. Throughout this decade, during the Cold War, Afghanistan was essentially under Soviet occupation. But eventually, the Afghan Mujahideen, which was a local insurgency of the Pashtuns, they managed to throw out the Soviets by 1989. Eventually, the Soviet Union collapsed and declined in 1991, and their defeat in Afghanistan played a major role in the collapse of the Soviet Union a couple of years later. Right? Even Britain would eventually decline as a global power. And then came the Americans. The Americans have been meddling in Afghanistan from a long time, from 1970s itself. But they invaded the country in 2001 and their troops remained in Afghanistan until 2021. The US fought a 2-decade conflict against Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and other terror groups. But eventually, the US was also forced to exit. The US, in an indirect way, was defeated. It could not achieve its objectives. The US suffered tremendous losses and it was forced to pull out the troops, and it allowed the Taliban to come back to power, thus establishing Afghanistan as the graveyard of empires. All the top global powers of that era, of that particular time, they have tried toppling regimes, they've tried invading the country, occupying the country, but all of them have been defeated and thrown out. So this is the reason why Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires. Now, coming back to the geography of Afghanistan, there's one more important point I would like to highlight. This region that you're looking at in the map, all right, it's also called the Golden Crescent. This whole region that you can see here is also referred to as the Golden Crescent region. The Golden Crescent. All right. This refers to 3 countries in particular, that is Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. These countries here are called the Golden Crescent countries. They are considered to be part of the Golden Crescent region. So this region is called the Golden Crescent as it is a major hub of drug production. Understood? In Afghanistan especially, right, there is extensive drug production that goes on. Previously, it was just opium. Today, even other synthetic drugs from cocaine to meth and LSD, many drugs which are consumed, right? They're all produced here in Afghanistan and trafficked around the world. So there are many drug cartels that operate, many criminal cartels that operate here, and they work with arms traffickers. They work closely with some intelligence agencies as well. And they also work closely with terrorist organizations. All right, so please make a note of this point. It's very, very important. There exists a direct nexus between criminal organizations, terrorist outfits, and intelligence agencies in this region, especially Pakistan's ISI, the Pakistani army. They have a direct involvement in the drug production and drug trade that happens from Afghanistan. The ISI has worked with various criminal cartels like the Dawood Ibrahim gang, the D gang. It has worked with various Pashtun warlords who control opium fields and drug factories in Afghanistan. And it traffics and proliferates the drugs across the region into India, into Indian Ocean, Africa, West Asia, and to rest of the world. So this is a major menace. The involvement of state agencies like Pakistan's ISI in working with criminal cartels like drug traffickers and arms traffickers, and all their connections with terrorist organizations like Taliban, Al Qaeda, Haqqani Network, Lashkar-e-Toiba, and the others. This is a dangerous cocktail. It's an explosive cocktail that is present here, and that is what makes the AFPAC region the hub of global terrorism. These linkages between organized crime and terrorism, along with state support, is what makes this region so vulnerable to security threats. Is that clear? So with this basic introduction, I would like to start with my discussion of Afghan history and the Afghan conflict. You might think, why is this relevant? Why is the history of Afghanistan relevant? From India's viewpoint, Afghanistan is very crucial for our security and national interests. To understand the current circumstances and what has happened in the recent past, you need to know the brief history of Afghan conflict. Is that clear? Now, if you look at the two images that I have shared here, you might be a little shocked and surprised. These two images are shockingly and surprisingly from Afghanistan, but from a very different era. These images are from 1960s. Now, what is so different or unique about these images? Right? Can someone tell me in the comments? If you look at these images, there's something that really strikes you, something that really shocks and surprises you. Women are studying. Very good. Women empowerment. Women are being educated. You can see that women are attending schools and colleges. Correct? You can see here that women are working, that too in the scientific domain. They're doing some research using microscopes, and also observe the dress. They are wearing what they want, not what the society is telling them, not what some religious code is telling them to. Now contrast this with today's Afghanistan, the Afghanistan of the last 40 years. There are strict dress codes, rigid religious codes, which is a very wrong interpretation of Sharia law, which has been enforced by radical extremist fundamentalist outfits. Women are prohibited from attending schools. Even today in 2023, in 2023, believe it or not, Afghan women are prohibited from attending schools and colleges. They are prohibited from working. Gender rights, women rights has been completely compromised in Afghanistan from 1970s till date. Now, this is a case where the country has gone backward. It has gone backward in time. Usually it works the other way around. So what does this tell you about Afghanistan? It tells you that something really horrible has happened to the country. There was a point where from 1950s to 1970s, Afghanistan was actually a more modern, progressive country. Right? More open, liberal values were being adopted. Women rights were being promoted. Social reforms were being carried out. Women were being allowed to study and work. They had almost equal rights. But the developments that happened in 1970s and later turned the clock back on Afghanistan. Radical extremists, religious fundamentalists started taking over the country. Majoritarian religion started dominating the country, and religious codes started being enforced. Is that clear? That too with brutal repression. Very rigid and wrong interpretation of the Sharia law has been enforced by fundamentalist and even terrorist outfits, which has completely broken women's rights in Afghanistan. So if this is the change that has happened, right, it is quite unbelievable as well. So obviously the question is, what happened to the country, right? What were those changes? What political, social changes took place here to lead to this disastrous outcome? Now, let's start our history with the 1950s to 1970s period. I'll take you through a series of developments coming all the way till 2023, and we'll be discussing some important global events along with some India's interest in Afghanistan. So this chapter is not just about Afghanistan. That's why I've allocated an entire session for this, because we will be covering many related topics related to global terrorism, which is a key topic in IR, the role of US in Afghanistan and its role in countering terrorism, right? The India-US relations in counterterrorism. All these are important topics for your exam. They all get covered under this discussion. All right. So let's start with the 1950s. The Cold War period had already started following the Second World War. Intense rivalry had broken out between US and Soviet Union because of their ideological differences and the competition and rivalry that they had gotten into. The US represented the Western power bloc, promoting democracy and capitalism as the ideal political economic model. So it had aligned with the European countries. It had even formed a military alliance, which is NATO, right? They were rivaled by the Eastern Bloc, led by the Soviets. The Soviets, along with few Central and East European countries and some other countries around the world, they were championing communism and socialism as the right political and economic model. So following the Second World War and following the decline of Britain as the global superpower, a competition began for superpower status between US and Soviet Union. It essentially was a bipolar world. Basically, there were two power poles. There were two major power centers that dominated the world at this point. This triggered intense rivalry, geopolitical rivalry and conflict between these two superpowers, and they would try to influence countries around the world to gain influence in those countries. They would engage in covert wars against each other, targeting each other all the time. Is that clear? They would wage this covert war in third countries as well, like in India, in Pakistan, in China. Around the world, US and USSR, they would wage this geopolitical covert war and rivalry in order to dominate over the other and retain and protect their influence. It was a period of tensions, suspicion, and there was intense rivalry between these power blocks. So, Afghanistan back then was a neighbor of Soviet Union. Please make a note of this point. The Soviet Union and Afghanistan were neighboring countries. Now, if you go back and look at the map, right, you might ask, sir, where is Soviet Union? Soviet Union included all these Central Asian countries that you are looking at. Right? Today, Russia is the successor state of Soviet Union. But Soviet Union was a much, much larger country that included Ukraine, Belarus, your Baltic states towards East Europe. It also included Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia towards the Eurasia region, and also included the Central Asian countries you're seeing here, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and all the neighboring countries of Afghanistan, that is Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. So Soviet Union shared direct borders with Afghanistan. At this point, Afghanistan was a monarchy. It was a monarchy ruled by a king, but it had a prime minister. The prime minister, Daoud Khan, was a progressive guy. He aligned the country with the Soviet Union. Afghanistan became a pro-Soviet monarchy under Daoud Khan. And for 2 decades, several progressive reforms were being introduced. See, historically, Afghan society has been a traditional conservative society where religious groups have dominated the society and the politics of Afghanistan. But the rise of Daoud Khan as the prime minister under the Afghan monarchy, right, and his alignment with the Soviets allowed him to introduce a lot of social, economic, and gender reforms. With regard to land, with regard to social codes and standards, with regard to gender rights and women empowerment, several positive reforms were introduced. And this is what led Afghanistan to become a more open, progressive society. Is that clear? As you know, communism and socialism is a left-wing ideology. Under left-wing ideology, there is less priority given to religion and faith, whereas religious conservatism and religious fundamentalism are right-wing extreme ideologies. So in Afghanistan, the native communities like Pashtuns, they were all traditional and conservative. They were all inclined towards right-wing fundamentalism. Whereas the pro-Soviet monarchy started promoting left-wing ideology, where religion was given lesser priority. Religious codes were being given lesser priority, and more modern principles were being adopted. So this period can be seen as the golden period of Afghanistan. The society was opening up, reforms were happening, women enjoyed equal rights, they could go where they want without being accompanied by a male member, without having to take permission from a male member in the family. They could wear what they want, they could study, they could work. These basic rights existed. But then, in 1970s, Daoud Khan was assassinated because the conservatives did not like him. There were many conservative elements, and there were a few other communist groups that had formed as well. And Daoud Khan was removed from power, and a communist government, another set of communist government was formed in the late 1970s. The Soviet Union would obviously like to retain its influence. With the monarchy, it had retained its influence, and even with changes that were happening, right? In fact, Soviet Union ensured that Afghanistan moved away from being a monarchy. It became a republican state. Under Daoud Khan, even when he was still alive, right, he changed Afghanistan from a monarchy to a republican state. But those who resisted these changes, these social, political changes that were happening, they got Daoud Khan removed. And there were other communist parties which had risen. Soviet Union would work with them to retain its influence, and again a pro-Soviet communist government was formed in late 70s. So all the while, when Soviet Union was influential here, the US was trying to constantly undermine the Soviet influence. As part of their Cold War geopolitical rivalry, the US was trying to undermine the Soviet influence, which meant it was trying to weaken the communist government. It was trying to counter the communists, and it allegedly started working with religious fundamentalists. Now, this exposes the hypocrisy of the US. They go around the world preaching democracy, human rights, right? Stand against terrorism and whatnot. But they themselves have worked with many extremist fundamentalist groups to serve their narrow agendas, to serve their national interests. Since the US was obsessed with countering Soviet Union and undermining Soviet influence in the neighborhood, it allegedly started cultivating ties with religious fundamentalist outfits and started encouraging them as well. So as American influence started rising, American influence was increasing because of its support of fundamentalist groups. And parallelly, there was a power struggle within the communist parties as well. Amongst few communist leaders who were pro-Soviet Union, a power struggle had broken out, causing political destabilization. So now the Soviets feared that if they don't act, the Americans are going to establish their influence and topple the pro-Soviet communist government. The Soviets feared that Americans will install a radical conservative government, which could become a threat, a security threat for Soviet Union on its borders. So as these risks were increasing, right, by then, a radical Mujahideen force had started forming under the leadership of the Pashtuns. The Pashtuns, who were very conservative religiously, who were more fundamentalist with regard to their faith, they had always opposed the changes the communists were carrying out, the pro-Soviet governments were carrying out. They were against the women reforms, the gender reforms. They were against all the social reforms that were happening. And now that they were being propped by the US, they were getting support from the US as well, and American influence was growing. The Pashtun radicals, they formed the Mujahideen, right, to wage a religious war against the communists. So essentially, the pro-Soviet communist government was weakening because of the threat posed by the Mujahideen, and because of infighting within the communist government. Soviet influence was under threat, and the Afghan government itself was under threat. In this context, in 1979, the Soviet Union decided to protect its interests by launching a full-scale invasion into Afghanistan. The situation is very similar to what happened with Ukraine. The Russian invasion into Ukraine, right, however wrong and illegal it is, has been triggered primarily by expanding Western influence into Ukraine. The growing American, NATO, and European influence is what pushed Russia to attack Ukraine. Right? Of course, it's blatantly illegal what Russia has done. It has broken international law. But the primary trigger is the rising Western influence. Something similar happened in Afghanistan in the 1970s that pushed Soviet Union to defend its influence in its neighborhood. And it invaded the country, carrying out a full-scale invasion into Afghanistan. All right, and this began the Afghan conflict, the modern day Afghan conflict as we know it. The Soviet troops would go on to occupy Afghanistan. The Soviet troops would occupy the country, and they would try to propel their pro-Soviet government. They would try to support the pro-Soviet communist government. Their goal was to target the Mujahideen and other threats that was destabilizing the pro-Soviet government. But this period of Soviet occupation, which lasted 1 decade, became a disastrous military intervention because Soviets didn't have the required resources, and Afghanistan was always a challenging country. The geography is very complex in Afghanistan. You have desert areas, challenging mountainous areas in the Hindu Kush, right? And plains in the south and the east, with very weak borders with Pakistan. The Durand line has not been respected by the Pashtuns. All right? So Pashtuns have never accepted the complete validity of the Durand line, which marks the boundaries between Pakistan and Afghanistan. So they easily move around the region as well. So the presence of religious radicalism and the complex geography, the complex politics of the region made it difficult for the Soviet Union to hold on, and they faced a major challenge as the Mujahideen started resisting the Soviet occupation. The Afghan Mujahideen mounted an insurgency. They launched an insurgent war against the occupying Soviet troops. And guess who would support the Mujahideen rebellion? The United States would see this as a golden opportunity to target the Soviets, to weaken the Soviets in their own backyard. So the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency of the US, which is the foreign intelligence agency of the US, would launch a major covert war in Afghanistan with like-minded countries such as European allies like UK, Germany, France, etc., and the Saudis, who also had common interests. These powers aligned together and their intelligence agencies would work with Pakistan's ISI, as Pakistan was a reliable partner for Western countries. The US had a lot of faith on Pakistan. Even European countries like Britain, they had a lot of faith on Pakistan and the ISI. So these foreign intelligence agencies would align with the ISI of Pakistan to sponsor a covert proxy war, a secret proxy war against the Soviets to protect their geopolitical interests. To protect their geopolitical interests, they backed a radical religious fundamentalist outfit and directly propped the Afghan Mujahideen against the occupying Soviet troops. So Pakistan, which has always been very close to Pashtuns, had very good contacts and ties with the Mujahideen. The ISI and the Pakistani army, they have been traditionally close to the Pashtun community and they've had very good ties with the Mujahideen. So by leveraging these ties, Pakistan would set up several terror camps along the Af-Pak border with the help of the CIA, and they would start funding them. They would start supplying advanced arms and weapons to them, along with providing military grade training to the Mujahideen fighters. Essentially, they turned a tribal insurgent militia into a well structured, well armed terrorist organization. Is that clear? It was just an outdated ethnic tribal insurgency. It was a tribal ethnic militia. Such a group was transformed into a formidable fighting unit. It was turned into a terrorist organization by the CIA with European and Saudi intelligence, along with Pakistani intelligence agencies. This was their secret war against the Soviets to counter the Soviet Union and its influence. So now the Afghan Mujahideen, who were empowered by the Western countries, they were having unlimited access to funds. They could smuggle and traffic the drugs very easily, make even more revenue. They were getting access to advanced weaponry and they were getting military grade training from Pakistan's ISI. So terror factories were created along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Nothing short of a terror factory came up along the boundary line. So the Mujahideen, which resisted the Soviet occupation, they managed to throw out the Soviets in 1989. The Soviets couldn't withstand the insurgency. The Soviets would mainly occupy some cities like Kabul, Herat, Jalalabad, and others. But in the rural areas and in the Pashtun stronghold areas like Kandahar, Kandahar has always been a stronghold of the Pashtuns. In such areas, the Soviets could never exercise their influence and they were very badly hit by the Mujahideen insurgency. They suffered tremendous losses. Thousands of Soviet troops were killed, and eventually the Soviet Union was forced to retreat from Afghanistan. The Soviets exited Afghanistan, pulled out the troops, and essentially accepted defeat in Afghanistan. another empire had been crushed to the graveyard, right? So now it was this American Pakistani covert war which had helped the Afghan Mujahideen to defeat the Soviets and to push the Soviets out. Correct? So, following this, the Americans conveniently ignored the Mujahideen. They didn't care about what will happen in Afghanistan. Their agenda, their objective had been achieved, and within a couple of years, the world itself transformed. Cold War came to an end. The Iron Curtain in Europe was lifted. Across Central and Eastern Europe, communist countries, they all collapsed and they transformed into democracies. Eventually, the Soviet Union itself would disintegrate and collapse, giving rise to all the new countries. Right? Germany had reunified by 1989. So communism, socialism was defeated and the Cold War came to an end. So US emerged as the global superpower. We entered a unipolar world where the US was the sole superpower. So having achieved its objectives, the US conveniently ignored Afghanistan and the Mujahideen. And they didn't bother much about the religious fundamentalism that they had created and bred in the region. For them, this was some faraway region, and they always felt this would never affect them, right? But they couldn't be wronger than this. Pakistan, right, throughout this period, saw this as a golden opportunity to use this for acting against India. Now, please make that connection. Remember what we studied yesterday. In the same time, in the parallel events that was happening with India, Pakistan, by mid-70s, Pakistan had sworn to take revenge against India. Following the liberation of Bangladesh war and how India broke Pakistan into two parts, it had committed to take revenge against India, and it had given a call to bleed India through 1,000 cuts. It was waiting for opportunities to exploit India's internal divisions, right? And parallelly, the Khalistan movement had started raging. The Khalistan movement was scaling in Punjab. By late 70s and early 80s, Khalistan movement had taken root. Then Kashmir insurgency and separatism also broke out by late 80s. Correct? I was mentioning this yesterday as well. So Pakistan found this as a convenient opportunity. Now that it had easy access to arms, funds, and drugs, and it had the blessing of Western countries, it knew that Western countries wouldn't question Pakistan because Pakistan was crucial for them and a key trusted ally for them. So be it US or European countries, they wouldn't care about what Pakistan would do with all the money, the drugs, and the weapons. So Pakistan started diverting a part of these funds, weapons, and drugs towards anti-India outfits. It gave direct support to the Khalistan groups, the Khalistan terror groups. Many Khalistani terrorists were sheltered in these terror camps where Mujahideen fighters were present. They were given training in the same terror camps and infrastructure which was created for the Mujahideen. Afghan drugs were being channeled and pumped into Punjab, right, which fueled the Khalistan movement. The same would be done with the Kashmir conflict as well. The Kashmir separatist insurgent terrorist movement that broke out in 1987 was directly linked with the Afghan events. Pakistan would bring Mujahideen fighters from Afghanistan and push the Mujahideen fighters into Kashmir to bring a religious angle to the Kashmir conflict. Right? Because by 1988-89, Afghan Mujahideen were relatively free. The Soviets had almost been defeated. So the ISI brought Afghan Mujahideen fighters into Kashmir to bring a more radical and more extremist insurgent war into Kashmir. So this was Pakistan's direct role in linking the Afghan conflict with the internal conflicts of India. Right? So this is where India started getting deeply concerned about the events in Afghanistan. The Americans, they retreated as well after the Soviets withdrew. They paid very little minimal attention going forward. They basically gave Pakistan a free hand. Pakistan would basically dominate Afghanistan from here onwards. So for Pakistan, Afghanistan became its strategic depth. Afghanistan has been treated as the strategic depth of Pakistan, meaning it gives an added strategic advantage to Pakistan against India. It means Pakistan can use Afghan soil to raise anti-India terror groups which would be located away from India and use them to target India. All right. So Pakistan saw Afghanistan as a strategic depth where it could hide and nurture these terrorist outfits on Afghan soil along the Durand Line and use them to launch covert proxy wars against India. So the risk for India escalated very quickly in the 80s. We would show the links to the US and European countries. We would provide evidence to them. But these governments wouldn't care about it. As they were hostile to India, right? India was aligned with Soviet Union throughout this period. Later, we aligned with Russia, right? So the Western countries largely saw India as a Soviet ally. We were on the opposite side of the Cold War. So because of the hostility and suspicion between India and the Western countries, the US and Britain, they wouldn't support India in any way. They wouldn't care about the Khalistan movement or the Kashmir conflict, even though they knew what Pakistan was doing. India gave evidence as well to show that Western funds, Western weapons provided by the CIA, the MI6, they were finding their hands, they were reaching the hands of Khalistani terrorists and Kashmiri terrorists. So despite India's repeated requests, Western countries wouldn't act against it, and Pakistan completely leveraged the opportunity to destabilize India. Is that clear? So now India had to act on its own. So following the defeat of Soviet Union and the retreat of Soviet Union and US, a power struggle broke out in Afghanistan between various leaders and factions, between different Mujahideen leaders and warlords. A power struggle broke out. Multiple governments were formed from 89 to 1996 and even pushed the country into a civil war. Factional, inter-ethnic and inter-tribal rivalries broke out, leading to a major power struggle and destabilization that pushed the country into a civil war from 1989 to 1996. So in the middle of this power vacuum, there were very brief governments during this period headed by some leaders. But after every few years, the governments would collapse or their authority would be challenged by the rivals. So there was constant infighting and rivalries between different leaders, parties, and ethnic groups. So in the middle of all this chaos that was happening, a new radical fundamentalist group was formed in 1994 called the Taliban. The Talibs are essentially religious students. It's a student-based outfit. All right, Talibs are basically students, religious students. So these elements were essentially part of the Mujahideen itself. The remnants of Afghan Mujahideen, which was mainly comprised of the Pashtuns, right? The radical students amongst them, the radical Talibs, they established this new outfit called the Taliban. So in a way, Taliban is a byproduct of Afghan Mujahideen, right? The US was the one which propped Afghan Mujahideen, and now Taliban, which was born out of it, in a way, in an indirect way, is an American creation. Or at least the Americans, the Western countries have contributed to it along with Pakistan. It was established by a notorious terrorist, Mullah Omar. Mullah Muhammad Omar established this organization in Kandahar. Kandahar is a very popular historic city, a major city in Afghanistan, in southern Afghanistan. So Kandahar, as I told you earlier, is a stronghold of the Pashtuns. Pashtuns have a very strong influence in Kandahar. This is where the Afghan Mujahideen and later Taliban would be centered, as this was their strong base. So from Kandahar, a group of radical students from the Mujahideen, they broke out and set up this new radical fundamentalist political outfit called the Taliban. Their goal was to establish an Islamic state. Their goal was to capture power, lead an armed insurgency if required, lead an armed movement to take out all the rivals, eliminate all the threats, and capture power to form an Islamic state and enforce a rigid, misinterpreted version of the Sharia law. This was their goal. Their goal was to target the non believers, the kafirs, the infidels. That's how they looked at all the others who wouldn't abide with their ideology, who wouldn't subscribe to the radical Wahhabism and Salafism. This was the core ideology of the Mujahideen and the Taliban, which was bred by Pakistan. Pakistan, along with Saudi Arabia, they would fund these radical madrasas, radical clerics who would preach the misinterpreted version of Islam and promote radical strands of Wahhabism and Salafism, which is a misinterpreted version of religion. So Taliban had only one goal, one agenda. Throw out all the competitors, throw out all the external powers and all the outsiders, and establish a religious state, an extremist state, and form the country or turn the country into an Islamic state with a very strict enforcement of religious codes such as the Sharia. So the Taliban began their conflict by targeting the rivals and the political players who were there. And very soon, the Taliban became a major force. And by 1996, it toppled the government, assassinated many top leaders, and captured power in the country. It captured Kabul. It captured the whole of South and East Afghanistan very quickly and established its complete control over Afghanistan. The Taliban basically formed the government. A radical fundamentalist political insurgent group had now formed a government, right? The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan was formed, and immediately they started targeting the minorities. They would target all the religious minorities. They would target the Sikhs. There are Sikh minorities in Afghanistan, right? Even today, you can find few families who are still left behind, right? But majority of them have left because of what has happened. But back then, before the persecution, a lot of Sikh minorities were present in Afghanistan. Even Buddhists, few Hindu families, Christians, and even Muslims like Shias, Hazaras, Ahmadiyas, even Sunnis who don't subscribe to Wahhabism, Salafism, right? Anyone who wouldn't believe in their radical ideology would be targeted by the Taliban. So persecution of religious minorities became rampant. Targeted killings against religious minorities became rampant. Essentially, human rights were being violated. Next, women were targeted. Women rights were targeted with the rigid Sharia law. Dress codes were imposed, right? Women couldn't step out of the house without a male member accompanying them. They couldn't take up any kind of activity without permission from the male member of the house. They were prohibited from attending schools and colleges. They were prohibited from work as well, thus destroying gender rights and decades of progress that Afghanistan had made. Is that clear? They banned movies, music, essentially anything good and fun and liberal was prohibited by the Taliban. Is that clear? Taliban had pushed Afghanistan centuries back in its timeline and evolution, right? It pushed the country back into medieval times. So these were dangerous times. Along with destroying the country and the Afghan society, the Taliban, which had become a puppet of Pakistan's ISI, it was largely controlled by the ISI. In fact, ISI had played a big role in the rise of Taliban. When it was established, Mullah Omar was backed by the ISI. Is that clear? The ISI gave tremendous support for the Taliban to make it so strong and powerful. So a Taliban-Pakistan nexus posed the biggest security challenge for India. Because the Taliban declared that Afghanistan is a sanctuary for terrorist organizations. It welcomed terrorists from around the world. It said Afghanistan is a sanctuary for you. If there are radicals, extremists around the world, you are welcome to Afghanistan. All of them would be received and you get a safe haven to operate from here. In fact, this had started few years before itself. By 1988, 1989 itself, several radicals from around the world had started assembling in Afghanistan as it provided them an ideal place to operate. So one individual, I'm sure all of you know him, Osama bin Laden, a Saudi engineer. He's a Saudi citizen from a very rich family, right? An engineer as well, well-studied and well-educated individual. He had started a terror organization in Africa, in Sudan. He was operating in Sudan until then, and he was running a radical terror group trying to fight for religious fundamentalist ideology. Now that Afghanistan was becoming a conducive place, he shifted base by 1989-99. He shifted base to Afghanistan and formed a new terror organization called the Al-Qaeda. The Al-Qaeda had been born in Afghanistan. Now, under the Taliban, groups like Al-Qaeda, they got complete shelter and support. A free hand, a free rein was given to these terrorist organizations under the Taliban rule, and Pakistan's ISI would work closely with all these terrorist outfits. Pakistan's ISI, the Pakistani army, at the highest level, would share good relations with Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist organizations that were taking root in Afghanistan. Right? This was a very dangerous period. Pakistan was basically using the Taliban and Al-Qaeda to create a support base for anti-India terrorist organizations. That was the agenda of Pakistan, to bleed India through 1,000 cuts. It had nurtured multiple organizations. So Lashkar-e-Toiba, later Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, Harkatul Mujahideen, and many others. They would all be connected with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda by Pakistan. Pakistan would form this connection. It would bring these entities together, share the terror infrastructure, and create a fertile ground along the Af-Pak border where these anti-India terror groups could freely operate, could easily raise funds and weapons, train, and then launch terror attacks against India. Right? So given these developments, India cut off relations with the Taliban. As soon as Taliban came to power, we declared Taliban as a terrorist organization. See, technically speaking, Taliban is actually a radical, insurgent political outfit. All right? But given the mindless violence it has committed, it can be classified as a terrorist group. So according to India, Taliban was a terrorist organization. We broke all ties with the Taliban because we knew that Taliban was working at the behest of Pakistan's ISI. India realized that Taliban would shelter anti-India terror groups on behalf of Pakistan. So we broke all ties with the Taliban and we shut our embassy as well. We shut down our embassy. We pulled out our diplomats. The Taliban, in a way, cut off ties with India as well and threw out the Indian diplomats and shut down the Indian embassy. So we had no diplomatic relations in 1996 with Afghanistan. So following this, to protect our interests, India had to do something. Given the security threats for India, it was extremely crucial for India to take immediate action. So India aligned with like-minded countries such as Iran and Russia and launched a secret war in Afghanistan. A covert war was launched. India's RAW, Research and Analysis Wing, would align with Iranian intelligence and Russian intelligence agencies, because for all of them, Taliban was a threat. Obviously, Iran saw Taliban as a threat because Iran is a Shia power, a Shia country led by radical Shia clerics, whereas Taliban is a radical Sunni outfit. So the sectarian divide in Islam was seen as a major issue by Iran. It felt threatened by the rise of a radical Sunni group in a neighboring country. So Iran was suspicious about the Taliban. Russia obviously hated the Taliban as it was a byproduct of Afghan Mujahideen. It was the Mujahideen which had defeated the Soviet troops, right? Russia feared that Taliban which was breeding terrorism, radicalism here, that would spread towards Central Asia, and then it would affect Russia and Russian influence in Central Asia. So Russia was deeply concerned. First of all, it hated the Taliban as it was part of the Mujahideen. And it was concerned about the spread of radicalism and terrorism that could affect Central Asia, which would in turn affect Russian influence and Russian interests. So the three countries came together and launched a secret war against the Taliban by sponsoring the Northern Alliance. We aligned with the Northern tribes. Is that clear? The coalition of the Northern tribes was called the Northern Alliance, and it was led by a legendary leader, Ahmad Shah Massoud. He's also referred to as the Lion of Panjshir Valley. The Panjshir Valley in Afghanistan, in northern Afghanistan, in the Hindu Kush, is a very complicated terrain. The Panjshir Valley, it's surrounded by high mountains on all the sides, and there's only one opening into it, one entrance to it. So those who control Panjshir Valley have a stronghold because outsiders cannot easily attack. As there is only one opening, right? Those who are in the valley can easily defend, and it becomes a stronghold. And this is where Ahmad Shah Massoud, the leader of the Northern Alliance, had established his base. Given his dominating role and influence in northern Afghanistan, he was called the Lion of Panjshir Valley. And India's RAW would build very close ties with Ahmad Shah Massoud. Ahmad Shah Massoud became our asset in Afghanistan, who would lead a rebellion against the Taliban rule with the backing of Iranian and Russian intelligence. Russia would allow India to access Soviet-era military bases in Central Asia. Even after Soviet Union disintegrated and collapsed, Russia was still very influential in Central Asian countries. So in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, there were a few military bases of Soviet era, like the Farkhor Air Base. The Farkhor Air Base and the Aini Air Base and few other facilities. Such military facilities existed in these Central Asian countries, which was of Soviet origin. So the Russians would give India access to these facilities. Essentially, it became an outpost of RAW. In a way, in an indirect, secret way, it became a foreign military base of India. Right? India wouldn't acknowledge this part of the covert war. Even today, we never speak about this or we never acknowledge this. But essentially, Farkhor Air Base and Aini Air Base became one of our first foreign military bases. Right? In a way, it was our staging ground. India's RAW would establish a major presence here with Iranian and Russian intelligence and start providing funds, weapons, and any other support, including medical support, to the Northern Alliance. The Northern tribes, which was a coalition of Tajiks, Uzbeks, Kazakhs, and other Central Asian tribes and ethnic groups, they were directly funded by India, Iran, and Russia together to set them up as a resistance force against the Taliban. This was a secret war where Pakistan was backing Taliban, right? And India, Iran, Russia were backing the Northern Alliance. All right? This secret war went on for a few years, from 96 to 2001. That's how India tried to protect its interests. Understood? Ahmad Shah Massoud was very good to India, very close to India. RAW had very good relations with Ahmad Shah Massoud. But parallelly, the rise of Al-Qaeda under Osama bin Laden started becoming a global concern and a global threat. By early 90s itself, Al-Qaeda had formed a strong presence and it had declared a war against Western countries. Osama bin Laden had declared war against Western countries, in particular, US and European countries, because he blamed them and held them responsible for all the problems in the Muslim world. from Palestine to North Africa to West Asia, all the conflicts, civil wars, everything, right, was a result of Western interference, according to Osama bin Laden. So his core ideology was that Western countries are to be blamed for suffering of Muslims around the world in conflict zones. All these conflicts were Western creations in a way. So he declared war against Western countries, a religious war, and he would lead Al Qaeda to launch major terror attacks against Western countries. In early 90s, in 1993, Al Qaeda executed one of its first major attack against the World Trade Center in New York. Yes, even before the actual 9/11 attacks against World Trade Center, 1 decade earlier, Al Qaeda had already planned and executed one attack. This was in 1993. A vehicle containing explosives had been driven into World Trade Center, the very iconic towers of New York, representing American capitalism, right? And this truck, which was loaded with explosives, it exploded in the basement, causing significant damage. But fortunately, it didn't turn into a major disaster. A few people were killed and injured, but the structure was not damaged, and it wasn't a major incident as such, right? It was only a partially successful attack. But this was just the beginning. By now, the CIA was paying attention to Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda. They were tracking him, keeping him under surveillance. They realized that Al Qaeda is a threat, a major threat. By 1999, Al Qaeda had scaled up its attacks. By 1998, 1999, its presence and influence had grown as terrorists from around the world were assembling in Afghanistan. Radicals from Southeast Asia, from Philippines, Indonesia, from South Asia like Pakistan and Bangladesh, even Sri Lanka and other parts of the world, from Africa, from West Asian countries, all these radical elements, they would go to Afghanistan to fight for Al Qaeda, as they believed in the ideology of Al Qaeda. So in 1998, 1999, there were major attacks carried out against American targets. Al Qaeda quickly increased its presence and influence in East Africa. Its presence grew across the Arabian Peninsula and also in North Africa and East Africa. So from Afghanistan, the Al Qaeda leadership, right, with the backing of Taliban, they spread their ideology and influence across West Asia and Africa. So the Arabian Peninsula, from Yemen to Iraq, then across Northern Africa and Eastern Africa, Al Qaeda's presence was growing, and it was getting a lot of local support in these places. So in East Africa, especially in Kenya and in Tanzania, Al Qaeda grew its presence, and it planned and executed one of the biggest terror attacks, where the American embassies were bombed in 1998. The US Embassy in Nairobi in Kenya and the US Embassy at Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, both were targeted in simultaneous attacks. This was a massive attack on an American target. Hundreds and hundreds of people were killed, including several American diplomats and American officials deployed in Kenya and in Tanzania. This was one of the biggest attacks on American targets ever. This was followed by an Al Qaeda attack on a US naval ship in Arabian Sea near the coast of Yemen, where Al Qaeda had established a presence. They planned and executed an attack against an American naval ship, which was present along the coastline of Yemen. The USS Cole, this was the naval ship, the USS Cole, was targeted by Al Qaeda, and they blew up the ship, killing several American soldiers. So clearly, Al Qaeda was rising in its influence and in its ability to carry out large, sophisticated attacks. But then came the mother of all attacks, the biggest ever terror attack that the world has ever witnessed. Right? Al Qaeda set a very ambitious goal for itself to carry out a major strike on American soil. And it wanted the attack to be as spectacular as possible, as high profile as possible, so that it could grab maximum attention. So Al Qaeda put in tremendous efforts and planning behind this sophisticated attack to hijack commercial planes in the US and fly the planes which means the hijackers have to learn. They have to learn how to fly a plane. They have to get pilot training and use them as missiles and fly them into key buildings, strategic buildings in the US. After years of planning, the Al Qaeda successfully executed the attack where multiple terrorists infiltrated the US. They settled in the US for several months. They joined flying schools. They got pilot training. They carefully planned their attack, and 4 commercial jets were hijacked on September 11th, 2001. Right? 2 of these planes, which the hijackers took over, were diverted towards New York, and they crashed into the twin towers of the World Trade Center, North and South Tower. Right? The World Trade Center would house thousands of people. Right? It's a popular workplace, represents corporate America. As a result of the attack, right, the structural integrity of the buildings were compromised. They eventually collapsed, and thousands of people were killed in this single incident. Another plane which was hijacked was headed towards Washington, right? It was used to strike the Pentagon, which is the headquarters of the Department of Defense of the US. The Pentagon building was struck by the third plane. The fourth hijacked plane, fortunately, was brought down by the passengers, because the passengers had learned by now what was happening. They realized that the hijackers are not going to let them live. And they also heard about planes crashing into buildings. They knew death was eventual. So some brave passengers, they overpowered the hijackers and crashed the fourth plane in an open field, which killed only the passengers and the crew and the hijackers without harming anyone else. According to American intelligence, the fourth plane was likely headed towards White House or the US Capitol building. Right? So this was the largest and the most audacious terror attack ever planned and executed. More than 3,000 people were killed, mostly Americans and several foreign nationals. And this enraged the US. Right? This was the biggest intelligence failure of the US. And in many ways, their sponsorship of radicalism and terrorism had come back to bite them. They were the ones who had propped the Mujahideen, supported the radical ideologies in Afghanistan, later ignored the region conveniently. India had given sufficient warnings, right? We had warned the US repeatedly what was happening, what Pakistan was doing, how these elements were serving their religious agenda, and how they didn't really care about geopolitics, right? But the US never cared about what India was saying. Finally, it paid the price and it declared a global war on terrorism. It decided to target all the terror groups around the world because the connections between terrorism and money laundering became very clear after 9/11 attacks. The investigations revealed the close links between terrorism and money laundering, how money laundering is used for terror financing. So US declared a global war on terrorism to target not just terror groups, but even money laundering and organized criminal networks. It would align with the NATO countries, the NATO allies of the US, right? They invoke the principle of collective defense. Under NATO, which is a military alliance, the allies treat any attack on a member country as an attack on the entire alliance itself. And all of them will mobilize troops to defend the country under attack. So they all backed the US and invoked the collective defense principle, and they mobilized a coalition force with the plan to invade Afghanistan. All right. See, initially, US was looking to target just Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. The American goal was to wipe out Al Qaeda and eliminate Osama bin Laden and the top leaders, as it held them responsible for the attack. And it demanded that the Taliban government cooperate along with Pakistan so that the US could target these terrorists. The US placed a clear condition in front of Pakistan and Afghanistan. It ordered both the governments, not requested them, not directed them, it ordered them. It ordered them to cooperate, or else both will perish. Both will be targeted by the American wrath. Right? That was the anger in America at that time. Very similar to what Israel is facing right now. So the US ordered Taliban to cooperate in hunting Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. It ordered Pakistan as well to work with US, provide intelligence and support needed to target the Al-Qaeda. Pakistan had no choice. It had to agree. It was forced to agree. But Taliban refused. As it saw Al-Qaeda as a brotherly organization, it refused to cooperate and shielded Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. So as a result, the US declared war on Afghanistan itself, and it got approval from UN Security Council for a full-fledged invasion of Afghanistan. The UNSC approved the NATO invasion, and a NATO coalition force called ISAF, International Security Assistance Force, would invade the country to target Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Is that clear? Then something interesting started happening. As India had predicted, Pakistan started showing its other face. It started playing a double game. It started two-timing the US, betraying the US. The Pakistanis always saw Taliban as an asset, Al-Qaeda as an asset. At any cost, Pakistan had to protect them before the invasion, right? So what Pakistan's ISI did was, before the Americans fully invaded the country, it carried out a strategic airlift from Kunduz. Kunduz is a place in Afghanistan, in eastern Afghanistan, near the Pakistani border. From Kunduz Air Base, Pakistani Air Force, along with the ISI, they ran multiple flights, secret flights, and they secretly took away all the Taliban leaders and several top terrorists. And it's also believed that Osama bin Laden was also taken away to be safely secured in Pakistan. On one hand, they were acting as American allies, as Western allies, sharing intelligence with them, helping them target terrorists. But in reality, this is what Pakistan was doing. It was protecting its most important asset, that is the terrorists in this region. It evacuated all the Taliban leaders, including Mullah Omar, including Haqqani, who is the leader of Haqqani network, right? Many top terrorists, including Osama bin Laden, were all evacuated, and it was most likely done through Kunduz airlift, where multiple planes flew out. Pakistani Air Force ran these flights, and secretly several terrorists were taken away from Afghanistan and protected safely in Pakistan. And guess who monitored this entire operation? India's RAW, which had a formidable intelligence presence in Afghanistan, thoroughly monitored this airlift and generated almost real-time intelligence regarding the ongoing airlift. Within a couple of days, hundreds and hundreds of terrorists were taken out into Pakistan. India monitored this operation of Pakistan, and we shared this intelligence with the US. We told them what Pakistan was doing, right? Prior to this, the US also had reached out to India finally. In fact, 9/11 attacks was a turning point. The US realized it needed more reliable partners to counter terrorism. The US couldn't trust Pakistan entirely, right? There was a trust deficit with Pakistan, even though they were working together. It was a love-hate relationship between them. So the Americans needed a better partner with regard to counterterrorism. So finally, the US kept aside its suspicion of India, its hostility with India, and sought a more closer, strategic, friendly relationship with India. As like-minded democracies with common concerns about terrorism, they came together in the field of intelligence sharing, and they started collaborating. They started working together. The Americans, they relied on Indian help. They sought India's assistance, as India had a good intelligence network in Pakistan and Afghanistan. So we informed the US and the Western countries about the Kunduz airlift, right? Now, even before this, even before 9/11 attacks, something else had happened. Just a couple of days before the attack, on 9th September, India's biggest asset, Ahmad Shah Massoud, had been assassinated by the Taliban. Taliban and Al-Qaeda, they killed Ahmad Shah Massoud just 1 or 2 days before the 9/11 attacks. So obviously, it was carried out with Pakistan's directions. Pakistan knew what was happening. It knew about the 9/11 attacks. It had connections with the 9/11 attackers. It wasn't that it was in the complete dark. Pakistan knew that there might be an American invasion, there might be an American attack. If it were to happen, they would rely on support from Northern Alliance. Because before the actual war started, before US invaded the country, a small group of American agents and soldiers were sent into Afghanistan secretly to create an opening into Afghanistan. These American soldiers, they entered from the northern side, from Central Asia. They took the help of northern tribes, the Northern Alliance, to enter Afghanistan and to start acting against Taliban. They would work with leaders like General Dostum and others. And Pakistan had predicted this, that US would need Northern Alliance support and India might provide that. India, Russia, Iran could work together with US and they could use Northern Alliance to, gain entry into Afghanistan. So since Ahmad Shah Massoud was the leader, Pakistan and Taliban and Al-Qaeda, together they decided that he has to be eliminated. So just before the 9/11 attacks, Ahmad Shah Massoud was killed. He was assassinated by terrorists linked with Taliban and Al-Qaeda. They came as journalists. They were disguised as journalists. They deceived Ahmad Shah Massoud and blew up a bomb, killing Ahmad Shah Massoud. He was brutally injured, and according to several reports, he did survive the bombing initially, but injuries were very serious. And he was brought to Farkhor Air Base, where India ran a medical facility. India's RAW was running a medical facility. So he was treated at RAW's medical facility in Central Asia, but he wouldn't make it. He would eventually lose his life. And thus, India lost a critical asset in Afghanistan. But eventually, the US did rely on Northern Alliance, which was cultivated by India and Russia and Iran. They took the help of General Dostum and other leaders to initially start planning their operations against the Taliban. All right. Now that India and US realized what Pakistan was doing, how it was airlifting terrorists out, the US-led invasion was already a wasteful exercise in a way, even before it began. But now it set its focus on toppling the Taliban government. Even though the top leaders were taken out, it wanted to topple the government and it wanted to target these terror leaders at least. Its main target was Osama bin Laden. So within few weeks, US carried out this major invasion with NATO forces and threw out the Taliban government. Taliban was toppled and removed, and the US and the other countries, they established a civilian government. They provided for a transition. They established an interim government, and finally elections were introduced. A constitution was drafted, elections were introduced, and by 2005, a strong civilian elected government was formed under President Hamid Karzai. Hamid Karzai is a good friend of India. He has grown up in India for most of his life. He has studied in India. He is one of the students of the Indian Military Academy. All right, so Hamid Karzai shares a very good bond with India. So someone with a close Indian connection became the president of Afghanistan. Right, he's the Pashtun, and he's received his part of education and military training in India. So under Hamid Karzai, a civilian government supported by Western countries was formed, and this was the opening India was looking for. So as soon as Afghanistan became an elected constitutional democracy, India immediately reached out to Hamid Karzai. We worked on the close bond we shared with him and established the relationship again. Finally, diplomatic ties were established, and India scaled up its relations with Afghanistan to counter the Pakistani influence. Is that clear? Even the Afghan government saw Pakistan as a threat. Understood? The civilian government under Hamid Karzai, they saw Pakistan as a threat because Pakistan was the one which was nurturing terrorism on Afghan soil. So Afghan Intelligence Agency, the NDS, started working closely with India's RAW, and we would collaborate in acting against Pakistan. India and Afghanistan would align together to counter Pakistan, especially its sponsorship of terrorism. So India's RAW and Afghan NDS, which was the new intelligence agency of the Afghan government, they both started working together in the region to counter terrorism, and India's diplomatic presence was quickly scaled up by the Indian government, right? Because it was extremely crucial to build our influence and counter Pakistan and to counter terrorism in the region. So India not only reopened its embassy in Kabul, but we also went on to scale up our diplomatic presence by opening multiple consulates. We opened 4 consulates at Herat, Mazar-e-Sharif, Jalalabad, and Kandahar. So in total, we had 5 missions in Afghanistan, 1 embassy in Kabul, and 4 major consulates in 4 cities of Afghanistan. So this was the golden period of India-Afghan relations, the best period of India-Afghan relations. We got very close to the civilian government. We committed to strengthen democracy, to support the elected civilian government in any possible way, to make it a strong government so that democracy could take root in the country, which could help counter radicalism and extremism, which was a threat to India as well. Right? So India promised to invest in the reconstruction of Afghanistan. We promised to mobilize funds and give all assistance to rebuild the country which had been destroyed by decades of war. So India started executing many important development projects. In these 20 years, India invested a total of $3 billion, $3.1 billion were invested in many key projects, which you can see here in the map. During this period, several critical projects were launched by India. They were not only funded by India, but India would execute and build them as well. Indian workers would be deployed, Indian companies would be deployed to execute these key projects to rebuild and reconstruct the Afghan economy. We built a very important road, the Zaranj-Dilaram road, that is clearly visible here in the map. Please look at this. This here is Zaranj. In the map, you can see Zaranj over here. This is Zaranj. And this is Dilaram over here. This key highway, the Zaranj-Dilaram highway, this entire highway was built by India. Now, what is the significance of this highway? The significance is that it connects with the Iranian border. This is the Iranian border. All right. India's plan was to establish connectivity with Afghanistan. Since Pakistan would never give us transit access through its territory, we wanted good connection with Afghanistan and Central Asia. Because now that we had good ties with Afghanistan, we already had good ties with Central Asia, we could further the relationship and exploit the resources together. Afghanistan was willing to share resources with India. Central Asian countries were ready to share resources with India. Problem was always connectivity. We lacked connectivity because we couldn't access Wakhan corridor. As Pakistan had occupied the territory here, Indian territory, we couldn't access the Wakhan corridor. If we had access, we would have directly connected with Afghanistan and even Central Asia. So due to Pakistan, this was not possible, and Pakistan would never give transit access to India. Even if it would give transit access, it would not be a reliable route because of the constant tensions and presence of terrorism in Pakistan. So India came out with a new strategy to establish connectivity with Afghanistan and Central Asia. And for this, we had to work with Iran. India launched a major project in Iran. At this point, Iran was a strategic partner. We built the Chabahar port, the strategic Chabahar port that you see here, facing Arabian Sea near the Hormuz Strait, the strategic Hormuz Strait in Persian Gulf. This important port was built by India. India would fund its construction, all right? And through the Chabahar port and through this road railway line over here, the Chabahar railway line and a parallel road that would link Chabahar with Zahedan. Zahedan is an Iranian town located over here on the border with Afghanistan. So our plan was to link these important places, connect Chabahar with Zahedan on the Iranian side, and connect Zaranj with Dilaram on the Afghan side. So this would become one corridor for moving goods, and this further could be extended along the ring road, the Garland Road, to connect with all major Afghan cities like Herat, Kandahar, Ghazni, and Kabul. And the plan of India was to take this road further into Central Asia, all the way into Central Asia. So basically, there would be direct connection between India, Afghanistan, and India, Central Asia because of the Zaranj Dilaram Highway, the Chabahar Port, and the Chabahar Railway Line. This was India's ambitious plan. So India invested heavily in these key infrastructure projects. All right, Zaranj Dilaram Road was built by India. Next, we also built the Salma Hydro Power Dam to generate hydropower electricity and to provide water for irrigation and drinking. The Salma Dam and Hydro Project was built by India. You can see here in the map, this is where the Salma Dam is located, which is an Indian project. Next, to strengthen democracy and to symbolize democracy in Afghanistan, the new parliament building of Afghanistan in Kabul was built by India. We inaugurated the Kabul parliament as well, few years later. Apart from these massive projects, we invested in many other projects, including power transmission, where India would invest in power grids, in setting up power grids in the country. We also funded education initiatives. We established schools. We improved healthcare by establishing hospitals, started providing training and skill development to the people of Afghanistan. So many such key projects were taken up, including few cultural projects, and a total of $3 billion plus was invested by India in these 20 years. This is how India scaled up its influence and presence and became one of the biggest contributors to the reconstruction of Afghanistan. All right? India would work with Afghanistan and we would jointly counter Pakistan and the terror groups that were operating here. So Afghanistan quickly became a strategic partner, and we elevated the relationship and formed a strategic partnership. A strategic partnership was formed with close security relations, with very close intelligence relations and intelligence sharing between RAW and NDS. We would share intelligence and even run joint operations if required to counter terrorism. We started establishing close defense relations as well, thus making Afghanistan a key partner of India. Is that clear? These were the positive developments that were happening between India and Afghanistan from 2001 to 2021. Even under Hamid Karzai and later under Ashraf Ghani, the next Afghan president, with both of them, India would work closely to execute these projects successfully and to rebuild the Afghan economy and to strengthen its democracy. All right. We even signed a trilateral agreement. Please write this down. In 2017, we signed a trilateral agreement. India, Iran, and Afghanistan. These three countries, they signed a trilateral agreement to operationalize the Chabahar trade route, which means goods would be traded between India and Afghanistan by using the Chabahar route, by using the Zaranj Dilaram highway built by India, and by using the road network in Iran. The plan was to connect with Chabahar port built by India and operated by an Indian company. Even today, the Chabahar port terminal is operated by an Indian company. All right. But the Chabahar railway line could not be started because India-Iran relations got affected. That's a different story altogether. India aligned with US and joined American sanctions and cut off trade with Iran. Especially, we cut off oil imports from Iran. So Iran got angry because of this, and it has dropped India from the Chabahar railway project. All right. So India is no longer part of Chabahar railway project. But that's for another discussion. We'll come to India-Iran relations under West Asia. So there we'll study more about it. So as India-Iran relations got affected, today the trade route is not functional, right? And also in Afghanistan, the friendly government is gone. Taliban has again captured power and formed a government. So right now, Indian investments are under threat. Be it Chabahar port, the railway line project, the highway we built in Afghanistan, right? And the various investments we made, they're all under threat because of the bad relations we have with Iran and because of the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan. But in 2017, things were slightly different. All right. Before things went downhill, we actually signed a trilateral partnership agreement to operationalize the Chabahar trade route to start trading between India and Afghanistan. And exports, imports had already started through this route. Even an air corridor was established between India and Afghanistan to promote trade, to promote exports and imports. Is that clear? So such close relations were developing. In the military domain, India started supplying small weapons like guns, ammunition, rifles, etc. We even donated helicopters. Old Russian Soviet helicopters were gifted by India to help the Afghan security forces to tackle insurgency and terrorism of the Taliban. So we gave some small weapons and helicopters and we offered them training. Many Afghan military officers were trained in Indian military academies by Indian armed forces. So we became a close partner in military training and started supplying some basic weapons along with helicopters as well. This strategic partnership was formed in the security and defense domain, but unfortunately, we have lost all the advantage. Because on one hand, our relations with Iran has been compromised due to US-Iran rivalry. US has targeted Iran over its nuclear program, imposed sanctions on Iran, and from 2018, it forced India to follow the American sanctions against Iran. The Modi government fell under American pressure in 2018 and cut off oil imports from Iran, which has angered Iran. So Iran has downgraded its ties with India. It has dropped India from the Chabahar railway project. All right. And in 2021, just 2 years ago, the Afghan government was thrown out. Foreign troops had completely exited and Taliban has captured power again in the country. Just like 1996, the Taliban is back to power since 2021. And this is a direct result of the disastrous involvement of the US in Afghanistan. The mistakes that US has committed following the invasion has directly contributed to the current crisis in Afghanistan, which affects Indian interests again. Is that clear? So let's discuss the next part of this topic after a short break. I hope this part of the discussion was interesting. I know it's a little factual, it's a little historical, but trust me, it's important to understand the whole dynamics of the region and some other global events connected to US and India, right? So that is why I feel it's an important topic. It gives you a broader understanding of international relations. Is that clear? So let's take a 15 minutes break. We'll go. Hello everyone, welcome back to the session. So before the break, we were talking about the Afghan conflict. We understood how the US invasion had toppled the Taliban government and how the foreign troops led by US were hunting Taliban and Al-Qaeda. We realized that the change that happened to a civilian government was good for India, and India had stepped up its relations with the Afghan government, and we established a major presence in Afghanistan, made very big investments, and India was working very closely with Afghanistan to check terrorism in the region. So following this, there were disastrous mistakes that were made by the US. The US lost its focus on this war. It began the invasion with the focus of eliminating Al Qaeda, targeting Taliban, essentially to eliminate terrorism from the region. But instead of doing that, the US got involved in unnecessary wars, such as the Iraq War in 2003. US and UK, they generated false intelligence and wrongly accused Iraq of building WMDs or weapons of mass destruction. Their actual agenda was to remove Saddam Hussein from power, the dictator in Iraq. They wanted to carry out regime change. And for that purpose, they lied about Iraq's WMDs and invaded the country. When the Afghan war was going on, they got involved in these unnecessary conflicts for their geopolitical interests, and they lost focus in Afghanistan. This allowed the Taliban, which was now comfortably sheltered in Pakistan across the border in Quetta. In Quetta, Balochistan, the Taliban leadership had been sheltered. So slowly, Taliban started regrouping, right? It would rally the Pashtun community again. It started regrouping and gaining its strength back. And by 2007, it launched a major insurgency against the foreign troops. It would start targeting the NATO alliance, the International Security Assistance Force. They became the targets, and this became a brutal insurgent war. So year by year, the Taliban became stronger and stronger, which eventually defeated the American objectives and the American purpose of going to war. By 2009-2010, President Obama, who had come to power, he ordered more troops into Afghanistan to ensure that terrorism is defeated and to ensure that US can exit Afghanistan as soon as possible. Because it had already been 8 to 9 years since the war had started, right? The American casualties were increasing. The foreign countries, the NATO countries, they were getting worried about the increasing losses they were suffering. So to quickly exit the country, President Obama increased the troops for a short period, hoping that terrorism could be tackled, Osama bin Laden could be found, Al Qaeda could be demolished. But the mistakes that US had already made, where it had lost focus and fought these unnecessary wars in Iraq and other places, right, had allowed Taliban to regroup and come back strongly. And now Taliban was becoming a major force. Eventually, the US did find Osama bin Laden. He was found hiding in Abbottabad, which is a military town located on the outskirts of Islamabad and Rawalpindi, right next to the military headquarters of Pakistani army, where all the top military officials stay. In such a high profile pace, Osama bin Laden was hiding. So obviously this couldn't have happened without Pakistani help. Without the help of the ISI and the Pakistani army, Osama bin Laden would have never found shelter in such a place. So eventually the US carried out a special operation where US commandos, they infiltrated into Pakistan, and the US Navy SEALs, Navy SEAL commandos, they assassinated Osama bin Laden. So they basically got one victory which they could claim for at least symbolic purposes, right? They managed to claim victory by eliminating Osama bin Laden. But just by eliminating one leader, you can't eliminate the entire terror network, right? They ignored the fact the Taliban and Al Qaeda were still as active as before. Killing Osama bin Laden wouldn't really make any difference on the ground. So following this, the Taliban attacks kept increasing. Many NATO allies, they started withdrawing from the war in Afghanistan. Australia, then some European countries, which were suffering a lot of losses. Their soldiers were getting killed in Afghanistan. So the war was becoming unpopular in all these countries. People were asking questions as to why we are involved in this conflict. So these foreign countries, which were NATO allies, they started pulling out their troops, and eventually US was left alone. Even Britain eventually pulled out its troops, and it was only US troops that remained, and Taliban now started targeting the American troops. Right? So this led to severe losses for the US, and the war became extremely unpopular with the American public. US citizens started questioning their government, that we are spending billions of dollars, thousands of our soldiers have been killed, and there are no results to show except for killing of Osama bin Laden. Nothing has really changed. Right? The Taliban is making a resurgence. Terrorism is as active as before. So questions started coming up in US. It became a major political issue, or electoral issue. So during the 2016 presidential campaign between President Obama and Donald Trump promised that if he's voted to power, he will prioritize the exit of US from Afghanistan. Even President Obama had tried. He had initiated a dialogue directly with the Taliban to work out a deal so that US troops can exit Afghanistan. But this dialogue process had failed. So now, the presidential candidate, Donald Trump, he had made a commitment to the American electorate that if voted to power, he will successfully work out a deal with Taliban and safely bring back the American troops. So after coming to power, Donald Trump initiated a direct dialogue with the Taliban. Many of the NATO troops had already been pulled out by other countries. Right? President Obama couldn't execute the exit of American troops. But after the elections, Donald Trump made this a priority and opened a dialogue with Taliban at Doha, that is in Qatar. Qatar has been a very influential country in geopolitics. Even though it's a small West Asian country, it has been very influential in geopolitical events. Qatar hosted the Taliban. It allowed Taliban to set up a political office, and the US appointed a special envoy, a US diplomat, Zalmay Khalilzad. He was directed by Donald Trump to work out an exit deal by talking to the Taliban directly. Now imagine this. US went to war to throw Taliban out. And now, after so many years, after billions of dollars down the drain, and after thousands of soldiers dead, they were talking to the very same group to work out a deal. They basically wanted to retreat. They wanted a face-saving exit. They wanted a way out in which they can claim some victory, pull out their troops safely, and ensure that US will not face such terror attacks in the future. So they forgot what will happen to the region. They ignored what will happen in the region if the troops are pulled out, if Taliban is allowed to come back. So as usual, the US prioritized its own interests. It even ignored India in the entire peace process. It didn't even include India in these dialogues that were going on between the US envoy and the Taliban leadership. At the Doha peace process, India was not even invited once. And this was after India investing $3 billion. India even faced many attacks. The Indian embassy, Indian consulates, they were repeatedly attacked by Haqqani network at the behest of Pakistan's ISI. Haqqani network is a faction of the Taliban. It's one of the branches of the Taliban, which is very close to Pakistan's ISI. So Pakistan had used Haqqani network to target Indian projects and Indian investments. And to threaten India, several attacks had happened against the Indian embassy in Kabul. The Indian consulates had been attacked. So few Indian diplomats, few Indian intelligence agents had been killed in these terror incidents. The Indian projects which were going on, they were being targeted, and Indian workers were kidnapped as well by Haqqani network. At this risk, India had been involved in the reconstruction of Afghanistan, in stabilizing the country, and yet US ignored India from the peace process. Forget India. The Afghan government itself was ignored. In deciding the political future of Afghanistan, the civilian government, the democratic elected government, which Western countries had propped, which US had supported, that government itself was ignored from the peace process. Not even once President Ashraf Ghani and the Afghan government was consulted in the peace process that was going on. So India's position was very clear that if you're talking to Taliban and trying to strike a peace deal, this process, this dialogue process, should be led by Afghan people. It should be led by the Afghan government, which is the legitimate representative of Afghanistan. The entire process should be owned by the Afghan people and the Afghan government, not by US, not by Taliban. This remained India's consistent position because we continued to look at Taliban as a terrorist outfit. Given its links to Pakistan and the threat for India, we looked at Taliban as a terrorist organization and we urged these countries to not engage in these talks with Taliban. Even if a political settlement had to be worked out, India's position was this process, the political dialogue process, should be led by the Afghan people and the Afghan government. It should be owned by the Afghan government. But both India and Afghan government were ignored from this entire process. And eventually, the US struck a deal in 2020. In February 2020, the US finalized the Doha Peace Agreement. The Doha Peace Agreement was signed between US and Taliban. And if you look at the provisions of the peace agreement, you will be shocked. It clearly shows the defeat of the US, another empire hitting the graveyard in Afghanistan. The US agreed for a ceasefire, meaning it will halt all the counter-terror operations. Taliban also. By now, Taliban was controlling around 60% of Afghan territory. Afghan civilian government was in no position to challenge the Taliban. Afghan security forces, they weren't capable of fighting the Taliban on their own. Right? They were heavily dependent on Western support, and also Afghan government and the Afghan forces that had been affected by rampant corruption under Ashraf Ghani. The Afghan government had become weak because it always relied on Western support. The Afghan defense forces, right? They had no ability, no resources to take on Taliban, which was better equipped than them. Plus, there was rampant corruption within the government. The security forces as well were suffering from corruption. So that there was no way that Afghanistan could stand on its own. And at such a time, US agreed to a ceasefire and Taliban also agreed to maintain a ceasefire. Along with that, the US promised to exit. It gave a timeline. It gave a timeline and fixed a deadline as well, within which the American troops would fully exit Afghanistan. Now, India was against this because the presence of foreign troops in Afghanistan was a positive factor. It was keeping a check on terrorism. India knew that once foreign troops exited, terrorism would spill over and could potentially affect India in Kashmir and also in Punjab. Just like it happened in 80s, how Pakistan had used Afghan soil and Afghan-based terror groups to connect them with the Khalistan and Kashmir-centric outfits. So India opposed the changes that were happening, but there was nothing much India could have done. The other powers like China, even Russia, Iran, and European powers, they all adopted a realistic approach. They realized that Taliban will eventually come back to power. They realized that US is going to quit and Taliban will run over the Afghan government within days and it will capture power again. So they all started talking to Taliban and striking their own deals to protect their interests. Imagine even Iran and Russia, which previously had targeted the Taliban, even they opened up to Taliban and started talking to them to secure their interests, to ensure that terrorism doesn't spill over to their countries. China and several European powers as well, they started working with Taliban and negotiating their own deals. India was the only one which was left out. And see, there are two sides to the argument. Some experts say that This was the time, 2016, 2017 was the time where even India should have been realistic. We should have pursued a pragmatic approach, ignored that Taliban was a terrorist organization, seen Taliban as a political radical outfit, and we should have negotiated as well and struck a deal to protect Indian interests, to protect our investments, our projects, and ensure that Afghan soil is not used for terrorism against India. All right? But the other argument is that Taliban is very close to Pakistan's ISI. It's close to Haqqani network. It's close to many terror groups, including Lashkar-e-Toiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. So in that case, how can India talk to Taliban? How can we recognize them? From India's perspective, it remains a terrorist outfit. But others, they saw Taliban as a radical political group, right? As an insurgent outfit. None of them would bother what will happen to Afghan people as long as their interests are protected. So if US was striking a deal with them, so could other powers as well. So all of them protected their interests. But India was caught in this dilemma. India kept waiting and waiting and waiting. And by the time we could act, it was already too late. All right. The US agreed to exit, and Taliban promised to hold an intra-Afghan dialogue, meaning it will talk to all the political parties and stakeholders to decide the future of Afghanistan. And it also secured the release of all prisoners. All the Taliban prisoners, they're all terrorists essentially, who are in American custody, and those who are in Afghan custody, they were all promised to be released by the US. So what's the point of the war? After 2 decades of conflict, all the terrorists who were arrested and jailed, the US agreed to release them. Not just those who are in American custody, but even those who are in Afghan custody. So all the top Taliban leaders, terrorists, and Al-Qaeda leaders were released. And in return, the US got only one commitment. In return for all these promises, that is ceasefire, exit of the troops within a deadline, and release of all prisoners. In return, US will get one favor, which is a promise from Taliban that Afghan soil will not be used for terror attacks against Western countries. So please understand the intricacies here. Taliban promised that Afghan soil will not be used in the future by terror groups to attack US, to attack European countries. But how about India? Can Afghan soil be used by terror groups to attack India? That was never discussed, never covered as well by the deal. Right? Despite being strategic partners, despite US relying on India to counter China, India was completely sidelined in the process. Indian interests were never taken into account, and there was a mistake on India's part as well because we did not act proactively. Ideally, by 2018, 2019, things were very clear that all countries are looking after their own interests. India should have been realistic. We should have sidelined Pakistan by striking a deal with Taliban directly. We should have started talking to Taliban. But because of the dilemma India was facing, we did not open a channel. We didn't engage with Taliban. And by the time India realized what was happening, it was already too late. So essentially, this was a defeat of the US, right? It was a face-saving exit because they gave all concessions. They agreed to quit the country, pull out all the troops, stop their operations, and release all the prisoners. In return, they get only one promise, that there will be a safe exit. Taliban will not target the exiting troops, and they'll not allow in the future Afghan soil to be used by terrorists to attack US and European countries. Look at the selfishness involved here, and that is unfortunately how international relations work. So, following the American exit, by 2021, US completed the pullout of the troops as promised. After Donald Trump, President Biden came to power. He also committed to the deal because the US had already made a commitment. And President Biden, who also prioritized the American exit of troops, pulled out all the troops in a very, very quick manner. In just a couple of months, all the American troops left with hardly any notice. And within weeks, the Taliban ran over the country. Taliban already controlled around 60% of the territory, right? Much more than the Afghan government itself. As soon as the American troops left, within few days, within couple of weeks, the Taliban ran over the entire country. It took over critical cities. Kandahar was always a stronghold. It reached out to Herat, Jalalabad, Mazar-e-Sharif, and other major towns, and it closed all the border checkpoints. It shut the border checkposts with Pakistan and with Central Asian countries and with Iran to ensure no one will escape. All right, it completely closed the border points, took over the key cities, took over rural areas as well, and finally headed towards Kabul, the capital. Within hours, Kabul collapsed with barely any resistance from Afghan security forces. Afghan security forces were already defeated in their mind itself. They simply gave up. They simply surrendered in front of the Taliban forces that were advancing, and the president himself fled the country. President and the top leadership, they ran away from the country instead of putting up a fight. So this was a very easy takeover. No one expected this to happen, right? Everyone thought it might take few months as Afghan forces were expected to fight back, but none of them resisted given that Taliban had the edge. So as soon as US left, within days, Afghanistan fell and it came back under Taliban rule. Essentially, it was back to square one. It was back to where it all began. So 2001 to 2021, basically no change, no difference. But US, NATO countries spent trillions of dollars. They lost thousands of soldiers and they failed to even defeat terrorism. None of their objectives were achieved and they simply exited, ran out of the country, leaving India and others to fend for themselves. It was at this point that India woke up. India was invited only for the signing of the agreement. When Doha deal was signed in Feb 2020, only for the signing ceremony we were invited by the US. So after Taliban takeover started, that is when India reached out to Qatar, and with Qatar's help, for the first time, we engaged in an official dialogue with Taliban leadership. The Indian ambassador to Qatar was asked to meet Taliban leaders at Doha, where Taliban has a political office. This was the first official political dialogue we had with Taliban. Right? By this time, it was too late. All the other countries had secured their interests. So as soon as Taliban took over, massive refugee crisis broke out. Right? Because there was a direct threat to several Afghan nationals, former officials of Afghan government. They all started running away. Most countries shut down their embassies very quickly, including India. In fact, from 2019 itself, we had started closing our consulates. As the security situation was deteriorating, our consulates were being shut. Finally, only the embassy remained in Kabul by 2021. Many Indian diplomats, they were all evacuated. All right, Indian Air Force ran many missions, and we had secretly brought out Indian diplomats safely to ensure that they don't face any threats. Only the Kabul embassy was functioning. But once the refugee crisis broke out, refugees fled towards all the borders, right? That is when India carried out an evacuation mission, because we had many Indian citizens along with Indian diplomats who were left behind. And there were many Afghan friends of India who had worked for India, helped India, like NDS intelligence officers, Afghan military officials, government officials who were friends of India. They all would be targeted by Taliban. They would all be eliminated. So India decided to save at least them, and we launched an evacuation mission called Operation Devi Shakti. Under Operation Devi Shakti, the Indian Air Force quickly mobilized its transport aircraft, and we managed to evacuate Indian nationals, Indian workers who were working here, Indian diplomats, and as well as Afghan friends of India. Once the operation was complete, we closed our embassy just like every other country. Is that clear? But following this, there have been some changes in India's policy. This is the last point I would like to make. In the last 2 years, there are some positive developments that are taking place. The Taliban this time is slightly different than before. See, back in 96, when Taliban came to power for the first time, it was extremely brutal. It was behaving like a medieval terrorist outfit. It was always driven by its religious fundamentalist agenda, right? It brutally targeted minorities, women, violated human rights and gender rights. You might have seen the Bamiyan Buddha statues, which is a Buddhist heritage in Afghanistan, which was destroyed by Taliban back in 96. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site where Buddha statues are carved into the mountains of the Bamiyan region. The Bamiyan Buddhist statues, which is a global heritage, right, was completely destroyed by the Taliban. That is how brutal they were, right? They violated human rights, gender rights, and minority rights. That is why most countries, they never recognized the previous Taliban government. Except for few countries, no government gave recognition to the then Taliban government. So this time the Taliban was smarter. They knew they needed international recognition because as soon as they took over, economic sanctions were applied. And all the Afghan funds present abroad were frozen by the US and the Western countries. Afghanistan came under sanctions as Taliban took over, and all the assets, financial assets of the previous Afghan government was frozen by Western countries so that Taliban cannot access the funds. So now Taliban desperately needed recognition from other countries. It needed help from other countries because Afghan people were struggling. They didn't have enough food, enough basic essentials. So they realized that India could be a great help and a great friend. This time the Taliban is slightly different, and you can notice that. They have tried to project themselves as a much better outfit than before. Even now, they have targeted minorities. They have targeted women as well. Women rights have again been curbed. They are not any different, but at least to the outside world, they are projecting that they are different. They are at least not as brutal as they were before. Because if they commit brutalities, no one will work with them, no one will recognize them. Right now, Taliban has a firm control over the country, and it wants help and assistance and recognition so that it can become the permanent government. Is that clear? So it has brought back the Sharia. It has enforced the dress code on women. It has prohibited women from studying and working. All right. It has persecuted minorities again. Internally, it's the same. But outside to the rest of the world, it is showing that it is slightly better, as if it's a more mature organization. So it has reached out to India. There is a communication which has started. Even though internal oppression has continued, it has just projected to the outside world that it's a reformed organization. This is just a excuse for getting recognition from others, and it knows that any recognition from India can be very valuable. But this apparently works for India's advantage. Now, since Taliban is looking and craving for a recognition, right, India can be a great help in this regard. If a democratic country like India were to recognize the Taliban government, this could be a big boost for them. And this could be our golden opportunity to pull Taliban away from Pakistan's influence. Right? Or else we have no leverage with Taliban. Absolutely no leverage with them. Only leverage could be they want recognition, they want aid, they want investments, and they know that India can provide because we have already invested $3 billion. So we want to protect those investments as well. We don't want the investments to go to drain, right? We want to counter the Pakistani influence and tackle the anti-India terror groups. So what if we use this as a leverage? Taliban also wants something, India also wants something. How about we strike a deal with them? We give recognition maybe in the future, or at least work with them and help them and assist them in any manner they want. In return, they promised to India to not allow Pakistan to use the soil for anti-India terror activities. This is a possibility right now. It's an opportunity. It's the only opening we have. And that is why India also has responded. As Afghan people were suffering from hunger, India sent food aid. We sent several truckloads of wheat and essential food supplies through the World Food Program, and Pakistan gave access to the supplies. In a rare instance, on humanitarian grounds, India was sending humanitarian supplies through World Food Program. We sent few million tons of wheat and other essential food items to help the Afghan people who have been very good friends of India in the past. So, since it was a humanitarian aid through World Food Program, Pakistan allowed Afghan trucks to come to the Indian border, collect the material and go back through Pakistani territory. Following this, we started an official dialogue. After the Indian ambassador in Qatar met Talibani leadership, we finally opened a direct dialogue. Indian diplomats went back to Afghanistan and started talking to Taliban directly. And we have reopened our embassy last year. The embassy in Kabul has been reopened with minimal capacity. Indian diplomats and intelligence officers are deployed again because right now we are engaging with the Taliban and talking to them to see if we can protect Indian interests. All right. But this, however, is a challenge. It's not as easy as we discussed this point. Because see, Taliban also includes Haqqani Network. Haqqani Network is a major terror organization which has targeted India. Pakistan has used Haqqani Network to attack India repeatedly. Its leader, Sirajuddin Haqqani, is a globally designated terrorist. He's listed under the UNSC 1267 Sanctions Committee as a global terrorist. Sirajuddin Haqqani is directly responsible for the death of Indian diplomats, Indian workers, and Indian intelligence officers in Afghanistan. The attacks on our embassy in Kabul, our consulates, our projects were carried out by Sirajuddin Haqqani through his group. Today, believe it or not, he's the home minister. He's the interior minister of the Taliban government. So if we are talking to Taliban, it means we have to engage with this terrorist who heads Haqqani Network. He's a globally designated terrorist by the UNSC, by the 1267 Sanctions Committee. We have held him responsible previously for attacks on Indian interests and for killing Indian nationals. But now we don't have any other choice. We have to talk to this government, which consists of such terrorists as leaders and ministers. Right? But to protect our interests, we have to do anything that's needed. And right now, there is small engagement going on, small dialogue going on between India and the Taliban. Only the future will tell us what will happen. One good thing, another good news for India is that differences have come up between Afghan Taliban and Pakistan. This is great news for India. Because remember yesterday we spoke about TTP, the Pakistan Taliban. Pakistan has gotten into a mess of its own. Remember we spoke about the security threat to the Pakistani state. It's facing a grave security crisis because the Pakistani branch of Taliban, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, has started carrying out major attacks against Pakistan. Now this is a threat to the Pakistani army and the ISI, and Pakistan asked Afghan Taliban, which formed the government, to put pressure on TTP to stop these attacks. Since Pakistan has always had influence over the Afghan Taliban, the Afghan branch of Taliban, after they came to power in 2021, it urged the Afghan Taliban government to put pressure on TTP because they are like brothers. They are shared organizations. They are connected to each other. They have the same ideology. TTP wants to throw Pakistani state out, just like Afghan Taliban threw out the Afghan government. Just like Afghan Taliban has formed the Islamic State and is enforcing Sharia, similarly, Pakistan Taliban wants to throw Pakistani state out and form an Islamic State in Pakistan and enforce the Sharia. So this has scared the army and the ISI. TTP is quite formidable. It has the ability to mount major attacks. So Pakistan requested Afghan Taliban to help and it mediated a ceasefire agreement. In 2021, Afghan Taliban government negotiated with TTP and the Pak government and worked out a ceasefire agreement. All right? But TTP has broken the ceasefire last year. In 2022, TTP rejected the ceasefire agreement and it is operating along the border. It is operating right along the Af-Pak border, along Afghan territory itself, on Afghan soil, which is now controlled by Afghan Taliban. And it's carrying out major attacks against Pakistan. So Pakistan is furious right now. That's why it retaliated by conducting airstrikes. And it has even launched military operations in the border area to target TTP. So this military action of Pakistan has angered the Afghan Taliban. They're not happy that Pakistani Air Force is carrying out airstrikes on Afghan soil near the border. Right? Pakistani troops have entered Afghan territory as well to hunt TTP. And Afghan Taliban is not going to allow Pakistan to demolish TTP because they look at Pakistan Taliban as their brother organization. So this divide which has come up is a major challenge for Pakistan. And this potentially is good news for India because we can leverage this opportunity if we want. If things work out, we can leverage this opportunity. Right? So this is where things stand as of today. So let's see what happens in the future. It's too early to predict. Right? Things might go in India's favor. It might go against us as well. So it's a very dynamic development. You need to constantly track what is happening here. So current affairs, newspapers will be your best friend in this regard. So I would like to stop here. We have covered everything about India, Afghanistan, and the entire region. And you also understood our approach to counterterrorism and how US has approached counterterrorism. Right? You also saw how US-India relations changed after 9/11 attacks. Correct? So this is where I would like to end. And I hope everything is clear. You guys have understood everything. Right? I've gone as slow as possible. I know it's a complex topic. So I've tried to break it down in a simple manner. So now let's move on to the last part of today's discussion. I'll take your questions at the end. I'll give you 5 to 10 minutes at the end where we discuss the questions and doubts. But let's take up the last two topics, very small topics. We can wrap it up and then move to the questions session. Now that we have covered a major part of our neighborhood, now that we have covered the major land neighbors of India, right? This is the right time, I feel, to discuss some important regional groupings that are based in our neighborhood. One is SAARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. The other one is BIMSTEC. All right. So let's discuss both SAARC and BIMSTEC. There are some basic facts that you should know for your prelims. And there is one important analysis regarding SAARC and BIMSTEC. We've actually discussed it before, but I want to repeat those points and provide you the complete analysis because mains questions can also be asked here. So let's see what is SAARC. SAARC is a regional organization focusing on regional cooperation. Its focus is South Asia. You can see here in the map, you can see the South Asian members of this grouping. And obviously the focus of these countries is to work together, to cooperate with each other, to help out each other and work together so the region can thrive, so that they can resolve their issues, improve trade, improve cultural relations, improve their political relations, and deal with the security and economic challenges of the region. That is the purpose of any regional group. You look at European Union, African Union, the Gulf Cooperation Council, ASEAN, all these groups have the same purpose, right? Any regional organization, its purpose is to bring the region together, to integrate the region, to bring the countries together so they can work with each other and help each other to improve the trade, build economic relations, cultural ties, bring closer political relations, and solve the challenges of the region. It could be developmental challenges, security challenges, right? To address these challenges, cooperation is needed between the regional countries. So the grouping for South Asia is the SAARC. It was established in the year 1985. Please write down the points, very important. It was established in 1985 at Dhaka. Bangladesh hosted this meeting of the South Asian countries. Except for Afghanistan, all the other countries were present. India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. These countries came together at Dhaka in 1985 with focus on promoting regional ties and regional cooperation, and they established the SAARC. This organization is headquartered at Kathmandu in Nepal. All right, it was established at the Dhaka meeting in 85, but the headquarters, the secretariat, is in Kathmandu in Nepal. In 2007, after Afghanistan got a elected civilian government, and after India Afghanistan became close friends, we got Afghanistan as well into the group as the latest member. All right, so initially when the group was established, Afghanistan was not a member because civil war was going on. Later Taliban had taken over the country. So only these countries were members: Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. In 2007, as India's ties with Afghanistan improved, India played a role in bringing Afghanistan into the group because we look at Afghanistan as a South Asian country. It also reiterates the point that we look at Afghanistan as a neighbor of India, which strengthens our claims over POK. Plus, friendly ties had developed with Afghanistan, and we look at Afghanistan as a South Asian country. So these 8 countries are the members of SAARC. All right. There are many observer states who have shown interest in the group. They have observer status, meaning they can attend the meetings, observe the meetings. They can't vote. They can't initiate any initiative. That's the difference between members and observers in any grouping. Members will have full powers. Members can host the summit. They can set the agenda. They can bring up issues for discussion, table resolutions, and they can vote. Observers will not have these powers. They'll simply attend the summit, observe what is being discussed, and contribute to the discussion. They can't set the agenda, they can't host the summit, they can't initiate any resolution, or they can't vote on any resolution. All right. So observers are Australia, China, European Union, Iran, Japan, Mauritius, the US, Myanmar, and South Korea. All these countries have major interests in South Asia, so they've all joined SAARC as observer states. Now, what is the objective of SAARC? What is its primary objective? SAARC wants to achieve regional and economic integration. Meaning, it wants to bring the region together by improving connectivity. That is cross-border connectivity. By linking roads, railway lines, waterways, by improving the cross-border movement through better checkposts, simpler visa immigration policies, right? That is how you bring the region together. That's how you promote regional integration. Connectivity has to improve. Cross-border movement of people and goods has to be simplified. It should be simple and easy for the citizens of this region to move from one country to another across checkposts and ports. So that's what any regional organization does. Now look at European Union. They have abolished border controls in the Schengen area, right? Citizens in the Schengen area can move from one country to another without a visa. They can settle in other countries. There is free movement of people, free movement of goods. That is how they've created a common market, causing economic integration to happen in Europe, right? So India also has the same vision for SAARC. It wants to promote regional integration through better connectivity and free movement, and achieve economic integration to create a common market. Maybe to establish a common customs union where taxes, duties are almost abolished and kept common amongst all borders, and maybe work out a free trade area which will boost trade between all the countries. This was the primary vision with which SARC was established, along with dealing with issues of South Asia, maybe political, geopolitical issues, security issues, or developmental issues, right? To tackle all these challenges, SARC was formed as a regional grouping. Today, SARC has a few achievements to its credit. It has taken up some initiatives, it has seen some success in that regard. For example, a free trade agreement was established in 2004 called SAFTA, the South Asian Free Trade Area. All right? Even though the free trade area was created, unfortunately, it's not successful. I'll explain why. I'll come to it later. All right? Even though free trade area has been established, it's not very successful. It has not given the desired results in improving trade between the SARC members. Trade has been facilitated, but it has not really improved between the member countries. A South Asian university was established in New Delhi. It is there even today. It operates even today to provide high quality education, higher education for South Asian students. But unfortunately, it has got a very bad reputation, right? It hasn't got enough funds. It doesn't have good professors, facilities, and infrastructure. It hasn't attracted the best talent. So many experts look at South Asian University as a failed experiment. It still continues to function, but it hasn't made the desired impact. Then Prime Minister Modi, after coming to power in 2014, as part of Neighborhood First policy, proposed a SARC satellite. PM Modi proposed that India will launch a satellite, ISRO will launch a satellite, which will provide free services to all SARC members as part of our Neighborhood First approach. But unfortunately, Pakistan created problems for the project. This has been one of the challenges at SARC. Pakistan has derailed Indian projects and Indian initiatives all the time. Whenever India has tried to improve connectivity, trade, cultural ties, or whenever India has tried to launch some new collaboration, Pakistan always blocks the initiative and tries to derail the initiative because it does not want India to dominate South Asia. Pakistan is also an influential member at SARC, and it derails the initiatives to not allow India become the dominant leader, the prominent leader of South Asia. So as India got frustrated with Pakistan's obstruction, we boycotted Pakistan. We left Pakistan out. We took out this project from SARC and turned this into South Asia satellite, which was launched in 2017. It was supposed to be a SARC initiative, but because of the problems Pakistan created, we took this project out of SARC. And by leaving Pakistan behind, India launched the satellite, and it's called South Asia Satellite. It is providing free services to Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and even to Nepal, right? So by leaving Pakistan out, by leaving SARC behind, we went ahead and launched the satellite separately, and we are providing free services to all the neighboring countries of India. There is a SARC Disaster Management Center to assist each other in case of disasters. This is functioning quite decently. Recently, we activated this measure when the COVID-19 pandemic broke out. When COVID-19 broke out, if you remember, PM Modi held a virtual meeting with SARC leaders. He held an online meeting with all the SARC leaders and promised assistance to all the member countries. India gave medicines, essential supplies were sent under Mission Sagar, right? Mission Sagar, and as well as separately through SARC, India promised assistance, including financial assistance to all the members. So in terms of disaster management, SARC still plays a quite an important role. And there is also a SARC food bank to ensure food security in the region. They've even established a development fund to sponsor some development projects. In the past, the SARC Development Fund has financed some development initiatives in different countries, in the member countries. They signed a regional railway agreement, but it has not started. It has again failed. There is no regional railway connectivity. India has done it bilaterally, meaning we do have railway connection with Bangladesh, Nepal, and now with Bhutan. But that's all bilateral initiatives of India, not through SAARC. We have an agreement for energy cooperation to share energy with each other. Again, it has not really taken off. So we have our own power transmission initiative with BBIN countries. We have created a sub-regional initiative, which we have studied in previous classes, where we take surplus electricity from Bhutan and transmit this to Bangladesh and Nepal to share electricity between these four countries. So even this is not with SAARC, it's outside of SAARC. Because SAARC in general has become a failed organization. It hasn't achieved anything concrete in these many years. India proposed the Motor Vehicles Agreement for SAARC countries to promote free movement of trucks and goods, to ensure vehicles, especially trucks, can move around freely across borders and carry goods to improve exports and imports. Right? We had proposed this Motor Vehicles Agreement. But as you can expect, Pakistan again spoiled the initiative. It tried to block the initiative, derail the initiative. So India, which has been repeatedly frustrated with Pakistan's activities, we took this agreement outside of SAARC and instead launched the BBIN initiative in 2015. That's how we conceptualized BBIN initiative, right? With Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, we proposed a corridor, a transport economic corridor, and a motor vehicles agreement to improve regional connectivity and economic trade. So every time Pakistan creates this problem, and this is one of the prime reasons why SAARC has been seen as a failed organization. Under SAARC, there is a currency swap framework. There is a currency swap arrangement to help countries if they face a liquidity crisis. Like Sri Lanka, for example, recently faced a massive economic crisis. It was a liquidity crisis essentially. It didn't have enough forex reserves left to continue imports. So if member countries face such a liquidity crisis, there is a SAARC currency swap framework available where India's RBI acts as the lead central bank and provides for a currency swap arrangement. Is that clear? In currency swap arrangement, we basically provide a certain amount of money in dollars, in US dollars, usually. The other country which is receiving the help will deposit the equivalent in their currency. You're exchanging the currency basically. All right. We will provide US dollars through RBI. RBI will run this SAARC framework, the currency swap framework. Let's say Sri Lanka wants $100 million. RBI will provide that. In return, Sri Lankan rupees, the equivalent of that will be deposited with RBI. At a later date, maybe after a few months, there will be a date set. At that date, Sri Lanka will return. It will pay that money back and take back its rupees. It will pay the dollars back to RBI and will give back the Sri Lankan rupees which was deposited. So basically, there is a currency swap which is happening. This is one way of countries overcoming liquidity crisis, right? They take the help of other countries or such groupings where currency swap facilities are available. So under SAARC, there is a currency swap framework. It was recently used just last year when Sri Lanka faced the economic crisis. India's RBI gave US dollars. We have taken Sri Lankan rupees in return. In the later date, in the future, once Sri Lanka overcomes the crisis, it will repay the dollars back and it will take the Sri Lankan rupees back. So these are some initiatives that SAARC has started. Some have partially succeeded, but most of them have failed. There are many other initiatives we can go on, but all of them are minor. They have not really progressed well. Apart from these minor ones I've mentioned, which have seen some success, rest of them, they're all failed initiatives. The reason why SAARC is a failure is primarily because of Pakistan. It has played an obstructionist role. It has obstructed everything that has been started by India. See, India has been the driver of SAARC, the prime leader of SAARC. We wanted many initiatives to be taken up. We proposed many initiatives, but every time Pakistan would block them purely to disrupt India, to ensure India does not dominate South Asia. Along with that, Pakistan's sponsorship of terrorism has destabilized the entire region, leading to tensions between India and Pakistan. Is that clear? Its sponsorship of terrorism has been a major friction point, and it has destabilized the whole region, and it has increased India-Pakistan tensions. So this affects the functioning of SAARC. They have a standing border dispute. So this is the primary challenge with regard to the success of SAARC. It has not been able to succeed. It has turned out to be a failed organization because of these factors. Along with that, there are other issues. There are unresolved border disputes with other members as well, like India, Nepal, for example. Right? Some of the smaller neighbors, they have feared India's domination, and there is a trust deficit sometimes. India, Nepal have some issues. India, Sri Lanka have issues. Right? India, Maldives have had issues in the past. So there have been these challenges where India has not been seen as a trusted partner. China has started favoring, Sri Lanka has started favoring China. Nepal has started favoring China. The China factor has played a role in creating a trust deficit. India does not have full faith on Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Maldives because China has become very influential in these countries. So that also plays a role. Then across the region, there is constant political economic instability. You take Nepal, it has faced a civil war. It's gone through such a big constitutional crisis. Even today, Nepal is politically unstable, economically backward. Take Afghanistan, right? Affected by civil war, and now it's back under Taliban rule. There's no clarity whether Afghanistan will remain a member of SAARC, right? Sri Lanka has faced major problems. It has faced internal security problems when Tamil militancy was active, and right now it's facing an economic crisis. Bangladesh has seen military coups. It has seen presence of radical elements. There is heavy communal polarization in Bangladesh and economic backwardness as well. And Pakistan, don't even ask, right? It has seen every political and economic problem. And across South Asia, there is very limited development. The region is considered as backward, one of the most backward regions in the world. Human development is low. There is poor education, poor healthcare, high poverty, lot of hunger across the region, including in India, which affects the functioning of SAARC. So all these factors have become reasons for the failure of the organization. But one recent development led India to sideline SAARC almost entirely. This happened in 2016, which we have already studied in our yesterday's class. When Pakistan carried out the Uri attacks through Jaish-e-Mohammed, India was furious, and India retaliated not just with surgical strikes, but we also launched a coercive diplomatic campaign. We have tried isolating Pakistan in South Asia, and for that purpose, we adopted the SAARC minus Pakistan approach. Meaning, we will deal with our South Asian neighbors. We will continue our friendly ties with our South Asian neighbors, but we will do this without SAARC. That is, if you exclude SAARC and continue our good bilateral ties with South Asian neighbors of India, you are basically excluding Pakistan. That is why we boycotted the Islamabad summit. The SAARC summit in 2016 was being hosted at Islamabad by Pakistan. It was just few weeks after Uri attacks. India boycotted the SAARC summit, and all the other members supported India. Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Maldives, Bhutan, all of them, they criticized Pakistan for sponsoring terrorism and destabilizing the region, and all of them quit and boycotted the SAARC summit. Since then, no SAARC summit has taken place. The last SAARC summit was in 2014 in Kathmandu. It's almost a decade. In 1 decade, in almost 9 to 10 years, no SAARC summit has happened. This is because India has sidelined the organization because of Pakistan's problems that has affected the organization. Is that clear? The only revival we saw was in 2020 when the pandemic broke out. When the pandemic broke out, India took its initiative, held a virtual conference to promise support to all the countries to fight the pandemic. This is the only revival we have seen. Apart from that, SAARC has become dysfunctional. All right? Through SAARC, India promised to provide medicines and all essential items to fight the pandemic. We have supplied free vaccines as well to almost all the SAARC members under our Vaccine Maitri initiative. Right? Other than this, another recent development is the SAARC currency swap framework, which was used to help Sri Lanka to overcome the economic crisis. These are the only two recent developments. Apart from that, SAARC as an organization has failed. India has ignored it. We have sidelined the organization itself as part of SAARC minus Pakistan approach. This helps India to isolate Pakistan in the region and bring diplomatic pressure on Pakistan for sponsoring terrorism. So what I'm trying to say is that SAARC has lost its relevance. That's why many experts believe it's a dead, failed organization. So what India has done is that since 2016, as we sidelined SAARC and as we tried to isolate Pakistan, we adopted a new strategy in our regional diplomacy and we revived an old, outdated organization called BIMSTEC. BIMSTEC is a very old organization set up in 1997. All right. It focuses on Bay of Bengal region. But this organization had largely been neglected and ignored. But in 2016, since we sidelined SAARC and Pakistan, we instead revived this organization called BIMSTEC, and today it has become one of the most prominent regional groupings of the Indo-Pacific. All right. That is why BIMSTEC becomes very, very important for our exams. BIMSTEC stands for Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation. That is the expansion of BIMSTEC today. As the name itself indicates, it is focused on Bay of Bengal and the rim countries of Bay of Bengal or the littoral states of Bay of Bengal. They are being brought together to form this regional organization. The focus of BIMSTEC is to promote economic relations, to cooperate with each other, promote opportunities for each other, and act as a bridge between South Asia and Southeast Asia. Because this group is very unique. It has members not just from South Asia, it has few members from Southeast Asia as well. All the major rim countries of Bay of Bengal are brought together, with Bay of Bengal being the center focus of this grouping. Is that clear? So please take a look at this. It was established in 97 through the Bangkok Declaration. Initially, when it was established, it was called BISTEC. When it was established in 97 through Bangkok Declaration, it had a very different name and a different form. BIST was an abbreviation for all the member countries: Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Thailand. These were the only 4 countries that signed the Bangkok Declaration to form this organization. So 3 countries from South Asia: Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka. 1 from Southeast Asia, that is Thailand. These 4 countries came together to promote economic cooperation in and around Bay of Bengal, and they had formed BISTEC. BIST stood for their countries, the name of the countries. B for Bangladesh, I for India, S for Sri Lanka, T for Thailand. So BIST, Economic Cooperation, was the name of the group when it was established through Bangkok Declaration. Then later, Myanmar also joined the grouping. Myanmar became the second Southeast Asian country to join the organization. So the name was changed to BIMSTEC, BIMSTEC. M for Myanmar, along with the previous four members, EC for economic cooperation. So this was the name. But later in 2004, Nepal and Bhutan were also added as a result of India's initiative. India brought Nepal and Bhutan as well, right? Because see, these are landlocked Himalayan states. We studied them in the first two classes. Both Nepal and Bhutan are dependent on Bay of Bengal for sea access. As they are landlocked countries, India provides sea access to them along with Bangladesh. So even they depend on Bay of Bengal. So India brought them as well into the group, and they help us provide support as well to our initiatives. So today, the organization has underwent a name change because Nepal, Bhutan were added. The previous name would not work. BIMSTEC will not work. So what they have done is they have changed the abbreviation. The hyphen was removed. BIMSTEC became the name of the grouping, and it stands for Bay of Bengal Initiative. It highlights Bay of Bengal. It helps in highlighting Bay of Bengal, which is the focus of the group. Bay of Bengal Initiative for multi-sectoral, meaning the organization focuses on multiple sectors to build cooperation. Now, this is a unique feature of BIMSTEC. It is a sector-based grouping. The group has identified few sectors and they cooperate in those specific sectors to promote technical and economic cooperation between the members. So that is BIMSTEC for you. With Bay of Bengal as the central focus, they are working in few identified sectors to promote technical and economic cooperation. Is that clear? This is the history, the origin of BIMSTEC. But the group had lost its relevance over the years because Myanmar and even Thailand, they hadn't shown much interest. Over the years from 2000 to 2016, BIMSTEC had lost relevance as a group. It wasn't very prominent. Is that clear? There were no meetings happening regularly. Some initiatives that they had agreed to, they weren't even started. Right? So BIMSTEC was seen as a failed and forgotten organization. In fact, if you ask UPSC aspirants from, let's say, 2010, 2011, trust me, they hadn't even heard about BIMSTEC. The group was so irrelevant at that point. But after Uri attacks, after the Uri attacks in 2016, and after we sidelined SAARC and Pakistan, right? India parallelly revived BIMSTEC to become the primary grouping of the region. Until then, SAARC was the primary grouping of the region of South Asia. Now, since we were isolating Pakistan, targeting Pakistan, we boycotted the SAARC summit, sidelined SAARC itself, and instead focused on Bay of Bengal and propped BIMSTEC as the prime regional grouping. We started doing this by inviting the BIMSTEC countries for the BRICS summit, which we hosted in Goa in 2016. This was the first sign that India was preferring to revive BIMSTEC, which is an old, outdated organization. We were planning to rejuvenate the organization and we were looking to sideline SAARC. This became evident at the BRICS summit. Because see, when the BRICS summit is hosted, the host country gets a chance to invite some regional countries and regional groups. Like for example, let's say Brazil is hosting the BRICS summit. Brazil will have the option to invite regional groupings from South America and the Caribbean. If let's say Russia is hosting the BRICS summit or South Africa, They can invite some regional groups. Russia will invite some Eurasian, Central Asian groups. All right. South Africa will invite some African groupings and African countries. So India would always invite SAARC countries before, because we saw SAARC as the prime grouping. But after Uri attacks, we sidelined SAARC, isolated Pakistan, and revived BIMSTEC. And we saw this happening at the BRICS summit, as BIMSTEC countries were invited to participate, not the SAARC countries. So basically, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan are the common members, except for Pakistan, Afghanistan, Maldives. The others are part of it, right? So this helps India to isolate and sideline Pakistan and work with these like-minded countries, and also connect with Southeast Asian countries like Myanmar and Thailand. So a complete new purpose was added to this group with the leadership of India. And today, the organization has been truly rejuvenated with India's efforts. BIMSTEC has emerged as one of the most important groupings in the region. And the fifth summit which happened, the fifth BIMSTEC summit in 2022 at Colombo, this is one of the most important summits of BIMSTEC. Because during Colombo summit, many big initiatives have been announced. Please write this down. BIMSTEC has finally adopted a charter. Any organization should have a charter. Charter is like the constitution. Like United Nations has the UN Charter. It defines the structure of the organization, how members will interact, how resolutions are introduced, how voting will happen, right? How the countries will cooperate with each other. All those provisions are contained in the charter. So charter is like the constitution of the organization. So BIMSTEC didn't even have a charter until last year. So at the Colombo summit, the fifth summit, finally the BIMSTEC charter has been adopted, which gives BIMSTEC a more legal and formal structure. It has given BIMSTEC right now a legal formal structure and helps in taking forward all the initiatives that have been announced. At the Colombo summit, the member countries, they reorganized their sectors of cooperation. I told you, right? It's a multi-sectoral grouping focused on sectoral cooperation. Previously, there were 14 sectors under which they were cooperating. But this was very haphazard and unorganized. Now, this has been restructured, and they've identified 7 sectors for cooperation where each member will provide leadership. Since there are 7 member countries, 5 from South Asia, 2 from Southeast Asia, each member country will take the leadership role for one particular sector. Like Bangladesh is the leader for trade, investment, development sector. That is one. Next, Bhutan leads environment and climate change, as it's a global leader in climate action efforts. With regard to security initiatives like counter-terrorism, BIMSTEC has started counter-terror cooperation. It has even held a military exercise. BIMSTEC countries have organized a military exercise under India's leadership, which has focused on counter-terrorism initiatives. All right. BIMSTEC countries have even conducted a disaster management exercise focusing on HADR operations, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations. So as the group has focused on counter-terrorism, disaster management, and other security issues, India has been designated as the leader of the security sector. So it covers counter-terror efforts like intelligence sharing, military exercises, disaster management and HADR operations, tackling organized crime, because the region is located near Golden Triangle and Golden Crescent, which are hubs of organized crime. Just like Golden Crescent towards Pakistan, Afghanistan, there is Golden Triangle towards Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos. That's another major hub of drug trafficking and arms trafficking, where insurgents and terrorists are getting support. So this affects security of the whole region. So they're focusing on organized crime and even energy security. So these sectors of security are led by India. Please remember this point, very important. This sector has been assigned to India. Counterterrorism, disaster management, organized crime and energy as part of the security sector. Myanmar leads agriculture and food security. Nepal on people-to-people contacts and cultural relations. Science, tech and innovation under Sri Lanka. Connectivity under Thailand. These are the 7 sectors under BIMSTEC. That's why it is a multi-sectoral grouping. At the Colombo Summit, they even launched the Master Plan for Transport Connectivity, under which they have an ambitious plan to take up around 200 plus connectivity infrastructure projects, which will be funded by Asian Development Bank. They're looking to bring billions of dollars in funding to execute some important connectivity projects. Is that clear? To integrate the region, to improve trade and connectivity in the region. Already several projects are going on. Like for example, the IMT Trilateral Highway, which we studied under Myanmar. The Kaladan project, which we have also covered. All such initiatives have been brought under BIMSTEC. There are many new projects being planned. So this master plan for transport connectivity includes road projects, railway projects, connection of waterways, like how India, Bangladesh have done, right? Connecting the water networks for inland navigation, creating maritime links and improving air connectivity and even digital connectivity. All these connectivity projects are being promoted under the master plan for transport connectivity. Asian Development Bank will fund most of the projects to bring South Asia and Southeast Asia closer via Bay of Bengal. And the other big development is that BIMSTEC has proposed a free trade agreement. This is an Indian initiative. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, while participating in the Colombo Summit, suggested that BIMSTEC should have its own FTA, a free trade agreement, to improve trade between these countries. So right now, negotiations are going on to work out an FTA which can improve regional and economic cooperation in the Bay of Bengal area. So these were the major developments that took place at last year's BIMSTEC summit. All right. The significance of BIMSTEC for India is that this group aligns with our Act East policy. Right? It will help us improve ties with our Southeast Asian neighbors like Myanmar and Thailand. It will help us promote our neighborhood first policy as well with Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal and Bhutan. So it's a good mixture of both. There are few direct neighbors of India from South Asia. There are few Southeast Asian countries as well. So it helps us promote neighborhood first and Act East policy. And don't forget, Bay of Bengal is a critical part of Indo-Pacific. It is in line with our Indo-Pacific doctrine, Indo-Pacific vision, through which we are trying to counter China and its influence in the Indo-Pacific. So as a leader of Bay of Bengal through BIMSTEC, we can counter Chinese influence in the region. It can truly help in promoting regional ties and economic ties, and it can connect different ecologies from Himalayas to Bay of Bengal. Right? So there is a great opportunity here for India to get closer to these countries. But however, there are some challenges as well for BIMSTEC. Not everything is easy for BIMSTEC, just like SAARC. Even though a lot of progress has been made, right? BIMSTEC has gone much ahead than SAARC. It still has many, many challenges. I think you can guess and point out what the challenges are. One big challenge is the situation in Myanmar, the crisis. The country has been consumed by a political crisis. Military junta is back. It's committing gross human rights violations. So this could become a big challenge. The country is under economic sanctions. Sri Lanka is facing a severe economic crisis. So key members are going through major challenges. Countries like Nepal and Sri Lanka have aligned closely with China. Sri Lankan government, Nepal governments in the past, they have acted against Indian interests by aligning with China, and they have promoted Chinese interests in the past. So there are many divergences within the group, right? It's not as easy as it appears. Then we studied how infrastructure connectivity projects between South Asia, Southeast Asia have not really taken off. Kaladan project, IMT highway project, they've all been delayed. So there is no efficiency, no consistency in the initiatives, right? So going forward, BIMSTEC will face all these challenges. It may not be able to raise the funds as it has planned. It may not be able to forge closer ties between South Asian and Southeast Asian countries because characteristically we are different. Myanmar, Thailand are very different countries and societies, whereas South Asian countries are very different. We do have good relations with them, but that's not the point. The point is, can we work together as a group, right? So there are some challenges to the organization, and there are many opportunities. There are several opportunities for India where we can push our Indo-Pacific doctrine, Act East policy, neighborhood first policy, and we can also help in isolating Pakistan and in sidelining SARC. So this brings us to a very important question. Can India continue ignoring SARC? Can we continue ignoring SARC and focus only on BIMSTEC? Is this the right approach or not? This SARC versus BIMSTEC approach of India, is it the correct approach or not? Or let me put it the other way. Can BIMSTEC replace SARC? Can it be seen as a replacement of SARC? What do you think? Yes or no? Yes or no? Is BIMSTEC a replacement of SARC? Can it be a replacement? Some are saying yes, some are saying no. Okay. See, let me point out both the arguments. Point number one, regional groups are specific to that region. Now, in which region is India located? We are located in South Asia. So, if India is a South Asian country, South Asia deserves its own regional group, which is currently SARC. BIMSTEC can never be a South Asian grouping alone. BIMSTEC is, at the end of the day, focused on South and Southeast Asia, with Bay of Bengal being the primary focus. So that being the case, BIMSTEC might give us a lot of opportunities towards Bay of Bengal, towards Indo-Pacific, towards Southeast Asia. It might give us a lot of opportunities. But South Asia will never become integrated through BIMSTEC. It's not possible at all. Without Pakistan, without even Maldives, how will you achieve integration in South Asia through BIMSTEC? It's not possible. This is the drawback. India right now has focused excessively on BIMSTEC. We have completely ignored SARC, right? The approach is mainly driven by Pakistan. SARC minus Pakistan approach is what is driving this strategy of India. So the criticism here is that BIMSTEC can't replace SARC. It can't be a South Asian grouping. If you want regional ties with your neighbors, you should have a strong, well-functioning regional group, and that has to be SARC as of now. Correct? That is where India is located. We are a South Asian country. We have to bring all South Asian countries together. I'm not saying BIMSTEC is not useful. BIMSTEC is a great initiative. India deserves credit for reviving BIMSTEC and making it a prominent group. BIMSTEC will help us in our Act East policy, in our ties with Southeast Asia, to promote our influence in Bay of Bengal and the Indo-Pacific. But it will not help in South Asian integration. For that, you need a South Asian group, including which includes all South Asian countries. Now, let me tell you the other argument. By promoting BIMSTEC and sidelining SAARC, we have succeeded in sidelining Pakistan. That's the only option we had. Given that Pakistan was repeatedly sponsoring terrorism, this was one way of isolating Pakistan and putting diplomatic pressure on Pakistan, because through BIMSTEC and by ignoring SAARC, we have managed to neglect Pakistan in the region. So supporters are pointing out this argument, saying that India has done a very good, it has taken a very good step by isolating Pakistan and by putting pressure on it by ignoring SAARC and reviving BIMSTEC. Right? India has done a good job of reviving BIMSTEC. It's become a prominent grouping. But to answer your question, can BIMSTEC replace SAARC? No, it can never. Both serve different purposes. Only advantage for India here is that it has helped in sidelining Pakistan and putting pressure on Pakistan. Other than that, South Asia will deserve its own grouping. If India has to become a regional leader, if we have to, dominate not just South Asia but Indo-Pacific, we need to solve the problems in South Asia. Of course, Pakistan is a big problem, but we have to find a way out. Maybe we need to think of a new group. Just by leaving Pakistan, we can form a South Asian group. Correct? Instead of SAARC, let's ignore and forget SAARC entirely. Maybe we should think of forming a new South Asian group that includes all 7 countries, or may leave Afghanistan as well. It's under Taliban right now. The other 6 countries from South Asia, they can come together, leave Pakistan, Afghanistan out, and form a South Asian grouping. Right? That is the need of the hour. Without a regional grouping, you can't promote regional ties. You can't improve economic and connectivity relations with your regional neighbors. So this is the assessment that you should be familiar with. Got it? So this completes my detailed discussion of all these important topics. Afghanistan, then the terrorism in the region, SAARC and BIMSTEC. All the topics have been covered. We still have a few more minutes to go. I would like to show you a couple of questions from previous question papers. We have already completed 1 week's class, right? Today marks the 1 week completion. So let's look at some questions from what we have covered. I want you guys to have an idea on what questions come in the exam. I want you to understand how the topics we are studying, how will it help you in your exam, in your prelims and mains. So I'll show you a couple of questions. I'll give you some discussion as well. And then I'll take up all your doubts. Let's take up a question from what we have covered. Look at this question. It's a prelims question. I launch a poll as well. Some of the points have been discussed, but India, Sri Lanka, we're yet to cover that. We'll do it later. But just look at the question. Try and attempt. Let's see how many of you can answer this. This gives you an idea on what kind of questions are being asked and what depth is UPSC going into. Consider the following. Value of India-Sri Lanka trade has consistently increased in the last decade. Textile and textile articles constitute an important item of trade between India and Bangladesh. In last 5 years, Nepal has been the largest trading partner of India in South Asia. Which of the statements are correct? I'm launching the poll. Let's see how many of you can get it right. I'll give you 15 seconds. All right. The poll is live. Go ahead, all of you. I want all of you to attempt this question. Don't tell me the answer in the comments. Attempt the poll. 4 seconds to go. Very good. Majority of you have got the right answer. Very good. 52% have said option B, 2 only. You're absolutely right. Under India-Bangladesh, I mentioned that textiles is one of the major trade item between India and Bangladesh. Third statement is wrong. See, Nepal is not our largest trading partner. Which country is the largest trading partner in South Asia? Alenta has given the right answer. Anjali and Deepika as well. Very good. It is Bangladesh, not Nepal. Bangladesh is our largest trading partner amongst our neighbors in South Asia. So statement 3 is wrong. Statement 1 is also incorrect because our trade with Sri Lanka has not consistently increased in the last decade. See, this is a tricky question. Actually, statement 2 and 3 can be checked. You can answer this if you have good in-depth knowledge about Nepal and Bangladesh. If you know anything about economic ties with Bangladesh, you'll know textiles is important. If you know anything about our economic ties with Bangladesh, you'll know that Bangladesh is our largest trading partner. So 2 and 3 can be easily marked. Statement 1 is a challenge. Now, no one will know the trade data of the last decade between India and Sri Lanka. If you ask me, even I don't know. I don't know what is the trade volume for last 10 years between India and Sri Lanka. Nobody will know this. This is where you have to be smart. You have to take a calculated guess. That's what UPSC is expecting from you. But not a blind guess. You have to think, apply some common sense. Now, usually, trade does not consistently increase. Usually. All right? But chalo, let's assume it happens. It happens in some cases where trade keeps on increasing between two countries. Now think, can this happen between India and Sri Lanka? The question was asked in 2022. That is, it is looking at the trade data from 2012 to 2021. Were there any problems during this period? Were there any economic shocks, economic imbalances during this period? Definitely there were. Sri Lanka's economic problems had already started from 2015 itself. If you know anything about Sri Lanka, you would have heard about its debt burden. That's one clue for you. Next, don't forget the pandemic. The pandemic devastated the economies around the world. It was one of the prime reasons why Sri Lanka's tourism was destroyed. That pushed Sri Lanka into further crisis. So when these shock events are there, how can trade consistently increase? It's highly unlikely. So take a calculated guess based on such common sense and logic. Mark statement 1 as wrong. So you'll be left with B. 52% have given the right answer. Very good. Next, let's see one more question. Let's look at this mains question. It's related to India, Bangladesh. It was asked in 2013. Read the question. The protests in Shahbag Square in Dhaka in Bangladesh reveal a fundamental split in the society between nationalists and Islamic forces. What is its significance for India? Now, many of you might think we have never covered this topic. You might ask, sir, you didn't even mention Shahbag Square protests. Where did we discuss this? Right? But trust me, guys, we have actually covered this topic. If you understood the liberation war, if you understood which elements in Bangladesh are pro-India and secular, and if you understood which elements are pro-Pakistan and radical, right, you can easily write an answer to this question. The question was asked in 2013 because of a current event in that year. In 2013, Awami League government of Sheikh Hasina was pursuing war tribunal cases from 1971 to punish the war criminals. Remember, we studied the genocide against Bengalis. So to punish those army officers of the Pakistani army who committed the genocide against Bengalis, Bangladesh was pursuing a trial, a criminal trial, to deliver death penalty to these war criminals. Sheikh Hasina had made it a top priority to take these cases forward. But when these trials were happening and when punishments were being delivered, mass protests broke out in Bangladesh led by the Islamic forces which are pro-Pakistan and which are more radical. This was countered by the nationalist forces who fought for Bangladesh's independence, the pro-India secular forces who worked with India in securing independence of Bangladesh. This led to violence in Dhaka at Shahbag Square, and it highlights the fundamental split in Bangladeshi society. Is that clear? So now build an answer on this. In the introduction, maybe mention the context. Mention what happened at Shahbag Square. Give the context in Bangladesh, what really happened with regard to the trials that were happening, and point out the differences between the nationalists and the Islamic pro-Pakistan forces. Then in the body, talk about the significance of this. Explain that Right now, we have a pro-India government under Sheikh Hasina. Awami League has been favorable. Explain how Sheikh Hasina has helped India. She has helped us tackle Northeast insurgency. Many major issues of India have been addressed by a pro-India government because nationalists are pro-India and they are secular. Point out the risk under the Islamic radical pro-Pakistan forces. Under them, we have seen under military rule, we have seen under BNP government that radicalism has increased, terrorism went up. Pakistan used Bangladesh to target India, right? Bangladesh became hostile to India. Communal polarization increased and religious minorities were persecuted, right? So this is the concern for India with regard to these radical forces. So once you present this argument in the body, highlight the significance, then conclude the answer. Conclude by saying that right now India-Bangladesh relations are extremely strong thanks to the friendly Awami League government. But however, we can't just depend on one party to protect our interests. We need to diversify our relationship. We need to invest in relations with other forces as well, right? Even if they are radical forces, sometimes you may have to work with them. You never know. Like Myanmar. Myanmar came under military rule, but we have no issues in working with them to protect our interests. If we have to protect our interests in the Northeast, tackle the security challenges, tomorrow if Awami League is defeated, let's say Sheikh Hasina is no more, right? We can't depend on one leader, one party all the time. We will need other partners in the future. We need to make those investments right now. So give a suggestion on these lines and you can end your answer. So this shows how you can build a structured answer. Start out with a good introduction, right? Don't beat around the bush. Don't add any unnecessary points. Directly address the question. In the body, build up the answer, substantiate your arguments, give valid examples if needed, and then conclude on the same lines. Don't deviate from your initial argument. You can't contradict yourself in the same answer, right? So whatever initial position you took in your introduction, continue with the same approach and conclude on the same lines by providing a way forward. And that completes your answer. Okay, look at this prelims question. 2016. It's a match the following type of question. There is an ethnic group matched with a country. You need to check whether the match is correct, whether the pairs are correctly matched. Kurds matched with Bangladesh, Madhesis with Nepal, Rohingyas with Myanmar. Let me launch a poll. It's a very seconds to go. That's why I told you map-based questions can be very important. Very good. 75% have got the right answer. Option C. 2 and 3 are correctly matched. Madhesis are from Terai belt of Nepal. Rohingyas are from Rakhine state in Myanmar. Right? We have covered both the topics. Kurds are from a different country, not from Bangladesh. Can anyone tell me in the comments, where can you find the Kurd community, the Kurd ethnic group? Shrihari says Iraq. Okay. Insurgent war against Turkey. There are Kurdish insurgent groups, militias. They are fighting against Turkey to form their own country called Kurdistan. They are frequently in news. That's why this question was asked by UPSC. All right. In fact, that year in 2016, the US relied on Kurd forces to defeat Islamic State. In 2016, ISIS was delivered a major defeat in Iraq and Syria by US by working with the Kurd militants. So that's why the question was picked. So I think this is enough for today. We have taken up some questions. So let's end here. Once we complete the neighborhood chapter, I'll take up even more questions. We'll discuss 3-4 mains questions and some more prelims questions as well. All right. So as of now, you can take up them for practice. The questions are added here in the PPT. See how many of them you can answer and try practicing your mains answer writing skills.